Welcome, everybody, to the lab. I'm your host, Josh. It's great to see you. Great to be here. Special guest. We've been going through serial killers. We've been deep diving on this, and we have reached one of the most notorious names in true crime history. One of the most bone-chilling people that you'll ever hear about. Tonight we're talking about Theodore Bundy. Theodore Robert Colwell. And who better to break it down than my friend, forensic psychologist, author of The New Evil. He has the largest database for mass and serial killers ever assembled. One of the smartest people that I know and have ever met, Dr. Gary Brucato of the Cold Case Foundation. He's on top of his game. He's at the top of his field. Dr. Gary, Bundy. It's a topic people to this day just still revel in and talk about it. And who better to talk about it than the expert on serial killers, Dr. Gary Brucato. Thank you so much for being here. Please, if you have not, go check out Dr. Gary Brucato's book, The New Evil. It is fascinating and gripping, and it's worse as it goes along. it's sort of it's a scale book, and it's very detailed. How are you today, Dr. Gary?
Very well. Can you hear me clearly, Josh?
I certainly can. Yes, I certainly can. And how's your weekend going?
Very well. There's been some pleasant things in life lately, so yes, things have been good. I will tell everybody that because some of the subject matter will be very difficult, just realize that we're going to be talking about some topics that may be activating to some people. Because we are talking about somebody who was essentially an apex predator among serial killers who thought of women and as we'll see, even children um, as totally expendable, not even human. In addition, I think the heaviness of the topic, kind of can depress some people. So I think one thing I would recommend is there's a friend of mine, Adam Swanson. I love the guy. I mean, I call him a friend, but he's like an online person I interact with, who's a pianist who plays a lot of old style music. And every Sunday he does a concert on YouTube. I happen to really like old timey music. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a pianist and I play that kind of music too. And it's so wholesome and so, like kind of Disney like, that I really think it's a good way to sort of cleanse the palate of some of the difficult stuff we're talking about. So if you get a chance, I definitely suggest you take a look at that after you've watched something as horrifying as we're about to discuss. We are going to talk tonight about Bundy in detail, and there'll be some information about a few of the victims that is lesser known, that has been published, but is not particularly well known by even some of the real Bundy aficionados that are out there. So I think it's worth it to stay tuned even for that. It is hard to breathe new life into Bundy. He has been a little idealized and kind of romanticized as a kind of a Jesse James bad boy that sort of threw caution to the wind and didn't care about convention and so forth. And he's also a popular favorite among people who are hybristophiles, who have attractions to people who have killed or committed other violent crime. And so there is a tendency to kind of pick up on his own narcissism and elevate him as if he was some kind of fascinating creature. And I think we need to talk about how, underneath all of that, this was a deeply pathetic human being, and put a little bit of the focus on the victims. I bet there are very few of you who can name more than two or three of the victims, but you could name Bundy. So Josh, let's jump in.
Absolutely. And, early
Thank you.
childhood with Ted Bundy, Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24th, 1946, to Eleanor Louise Cowell at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. And that's an interesting uh, hospital. Obviously it tells you exactly what it is there. And Dr. Gary, you and I were talking just a bit before the show, that there were chirps that you've heard that he was unsuccessfully. She attempted to abort him as before he was born. Correct?
I've seen different things on that, but it would certainly be an important piece of information, because you have to remember that one of the central themes you're going to see with Bundy is a preoccupation with the idea of being unwanted. Of a woman who simply doesn't think his life is worth it, or that he's of any value. And think about, if you were to find something like that out, how it might make you preoccupied with the idea of being the arbiter of whether someone lives or dies, having been subject to whether a female figure wanted him to live or die, and then feeling that you turn around and kind of project that onto victims is very interesting. But there are a lot of things in the life of Ted Bundy that, you know, you have to sort of take some of them with a grain of salt, because the facts get changed around.
Sure.
It's sort of the same way that I'm very interested in saintly people and very wicked behavior, right? And that same thing happens with saintly people, right? Like, look at the life of Saint Francis of Assisi, and good luck, finding, a story that you could be sure is true. Well, in the same way with Bundy, there's a sort of tendency to exaggerate everything with him. So,
Yeah.
so, but
Oh,
but anyway, so,
yeah.
and notice he was born in November, right, Josh? There have been studies that have shown that more serial killers are born in November than any other month, and that's extremely interesting to think about
I
why
was
that might be.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
was born in
So,
November, so maybe I can
oh
balance that
well.
out a little bit. His biological father's identity has never been confirmed. His original birth certificate apparently assigns paternity to a salesman and a United States Air Force veteran named Lloyd Marshall. Though
Mhm.
uh, a copy of it listed his father as unknown, and Louise claimed that she met a war veteran named Jack Worthington, who abandoned her, and soon after, she became pregnant. Census records reveal that several men by the name of John Worthington and Lloyd Marshall lived near Louise when Bundy was conceived. Some family members expressed suspicion that Bundy was served by Louise's own father, which is, a just such a terrible thought. But however, in 2020 documentary film Crazy Not Insane, psychiatrist Dorothy Lewis claims she received a sample of Bundy's blood and DNA, uh, and the test had confirmed that he was not the product of incest. For
Mhm.
the first 3 years of his life, Bundy lived in Roxborough, neighborhood of Philadelphia, with his maternal grandparents, Samuel Kneach. How do you say that? Netch Cowell? I don't know.
I mean, to tell you the truth, I never knew how to pronounce it,
I don't
but
know.
spell it.
It's Kneccht.
I mean, my guess is it would be pronounced Nietzsche, but I'm not sure.
What I was thinking. The couple raised him as their son to avoid the social stigma that accompanied birth outside of wedlock at the time. Family, friends, and even young Ted were told that his grandparents were his parents and that his mother was his older sister. Bundy eventually discovered the truth about his family, although his recollections of the circumstances varied. He told a girlfriend that a cousin showed him a copy of his birth certificate after calling him a bastard. But he told biographers Stephen Mitchell and Hugh Answorth that he had found the certificate himself. Biographer and true crime writer Ann Rule, who knew Bundy personally, wrote that he did not find out about his true parentage until 1969 when he located his original birth record in Vermont. Bundy expressed a lifelong resentment towards his mother for never telling him about his real father and for leaving him to discover the truth about the paternity for
Right.
himself.
Now, Josh, one of the things I want to pause and make sure the audience understands is that and I've touched on this with previous serial killers, but some people here have never heard us talk about it, that there is a tendency to become caught up in the idea that to understand serial killers, particularly of this type, the most popular type, the one with serial sexual sadism, right? That type is that you really have to get that some kind of childhood abuse or other issues kind of give rise to fantasies of domination, control, manipulation, and then in adolescence, it gets caught up with sexual expression of that, and then some precipitating factor usually pushes the person out of fantasy into going out and killing. Part of the problem with Bundy is that Bundy really does seem to be one of these people who just had a kind of genetic inborn psychopathy. And part of the desire to make a neat narrative is going to involve recalling every little thing that happened to him in his life that could have pushed him in that direction to try to blame it on external factors. But the reality is that there was something in Bundy's constitution that was extremely psychopathic. And what you want to understand is that if he had not had some of these adverse experiences, he might have used them in a pro-social way. And indeed, he had been thinking about, maybe being an attorney, joining politics, and some of the other things that are common among sociopathic people sometimes. Not all people in those fields are sociopathic, but some sociopathic people wind up in those fields and other fields that he thought about, where aggression and interpersonal competitiveness can be played out with more pro-social aims. You could lie and cheat and steal and so forth, but at least there's the panache of being somebody that is doing something pro-social sometimes. Well, with Bundy, he clearly is going to get pushed in a different direction because of repetitive disappointments by women and anger about the instability of the objects in his life. And Anne Rule is an example of a female in his life that was a positive force that seemed to kind of care about him and like him. And then you're going to see there are other women in his life that he degraded and kind of felt were fools and so forth. And we're going to see that in one of the favorite ruses of Bundy, where he would pretend to need help, right? You put a kind of a cast on and you walk up to a young woman and you say, oh, could you help me put my sailboat on top of the car or something like that? And if the woman says yes and goes over to help you, he takes some kind of metallic object that's been hidden in the housing of the wheel, for example, bops her over the head like a typical organized serial killer would do for the purpose of incapacitating her to take her off somewhere. Now, what is the symbolism of that, which ties to some of this childhood stuff? Well, the symbolism of it is that you have an individual who is believing you, is trusting you, is wants to be kind to you and help you, right? And then you punish them for it. Because that's how Bundy felt, I think. Bundy felt that he had believed and trusted people in his life and that they took advantage of him, that out of nowhere they came with the cudgel and bopped him over the head. See,
Right.
so the idea is that you project that onto the victim and you say, "Oh, you're the imbecile who trusted. You're the idiot who showed kindness to somebody, and now you're going to suffer. You're going to pay." And so projected onto the victim is going to be all of that. Now, we're also going to see that we all think of Bundy as someone who quickly, killed victims and then sometimes prolonged it through necrophilia. through body parts and things like that. But there is suspicion there was at least one victim that he kept alive for quite some time, even for days, which would suggest a little bit more of a proclivity for torture
Torture, yeah.
than we generally think about with Bundy.
Right.
So I think I wanted to mention that because I think it ties right into this upset about the instability of his objects in his life. So then I guess if you pick back up from there.
Yeah, and this is where, I mean, it really just I wouldn't say gets, but it gives you this, it just gives you this very clear picture of a very disturbed young man who
He was
has
a psychopath.
been,
Yeah, disturbed in the sense that he was a psychopath.
no
Right.
question about it. Bundy occasionally exhibited disturbing behavior at an early age. Luis's younger sister, Julia Cowell, recalled awakening from a nap to find herself surrounded by knives
Hmm.
from the kitchen and her 3-year-old nephew standing by the bed smiling. In some interviews, Bundy spoke warmly of his grandparents and told Rule that he identified with and respected and clung to his grandfather, Samuel. In
Hmm.
1987, however, he and other family members told attorneys that Samuel was a tyrannical bully who beat his wife and dog, swung neighbors' cats by their tails, and expressed racist and xenophobic attitudes. In one instance, Samuel reportedly threw Julia down a flight of stairs for oversleeping. He would sometimes speak aloud to unseen presences, and at least once flew into a violent rage when the question of Bundy's paternity was raised. Bundy described his grandmother as a timid and obedient woman who periodically underwent electroconvulsive therapy for depression and feared to leave their house towards the end of her life. These descriptions of Bundy's grandparents have been questioned in more recent investigations. Some locals in Roxborough remembered Samuel as a fine man and expressed bewilderment at the reports of him being violent. The characterization that Sam was a raging alcoholic and animal abuser was a convenient characterization used to make people justify why Ted was the way he was, said one of Bundy's cousins. From my limit, this is a quote from the cousin. From my limited exposure to him, nothing could be farther from the truth. His daughters loved him dearly and had nothing but fond memories of him. In addition, Luis's sister, Audrey Cowell, stated that their mother could not leave her home because she suffered a stroke due to being overweight and was not mentally ill. And in 1950, Luis changed her surname to from Cowell to Nelson.
Hmm.
Uh, and the urging of multiple family members, she left Philadelphia with Ted to live with a cousin, Alan and Jane Scott, in Tacoma, Washington. This is the West Coast move that and you'll see that as we talk more about him is
Yeah,
where his
that's going
crime.
to turn out to be very important.
Absolutely.
Josh, the that point about the grandfather is important because if Bundy was indeed a congenital psychopath, you would expect a family history of some of these things. I have to tell you that psychopathy doesn't happen in a vacuum. A person could be a psychopath and have other features, right? I mean, they could be schizoid or completely psychotic in addition, like Albert Fish. They could be somebody who has a severe mood disorder at the same time that they're suffering from, not suffering from, but that they're a psychopath. And so that sometimes when we encounter people that have a psychopathic personality, we have to understand that sometimes they're moody or psychotic in addition. And depending upon what's going on in their life and their ability to cope with it, they can fly into rages or assert that psychopathic side a little bit more, or engage in drugs or alcohol. Another thing that I think gets underplayed is how many psychopathic people, because of their deviance, are also willing to dabble in perverse sexual interests that then meet criteria for things like paraphilic disorders or fetishes, right?
Right.
And the difference, of course, between those two things is that a fetish has to do with a sexual thing that you need to achieve arousal that is not alive. It's a situation or a thing, whereas a paraphilic disorder is about needing a type of person to be involved, who it's not appropriate to have that kind of dynamic with, whether that's a child or a teenager who's underage. That would be called hebephilia, or an animal, or an elderly person that's, where there's an inappropriateness, or things like that, where, let's say a 25-year-old offender needs to favors 85-year-old victims, things like that. And
Right.
there are also behaviors like peeping, collecting underwear, things like that. And we'll see that in the life of Bundy, some fetishistic behaviors, voyeurism, and things like that, figure into his life. They start to add to a kind of sense of control, over women, that heated up some of his crimes. There's that quality. And we're going to see that no matter what happened to this guy, the overarching theme is always that he was like God, asserting complete control over an individual, whether it's the breath of life in their body that he would allow to seep out at his own pace, or becoming aroused by the feeling of them dying in the middle of a forced sexual act, where he would actually become excited by the spasm of the body as the person
Mhm.
dies,
Right.
to achieve orgasm, right?
Right.
Or if it is watching a person that doesn't know they're being watched, or even taking advantage of the dismembered body parts of a victim that are kept alive, so to speak, with makeup or
Well,
wigs or whatever he wanted to do.
and it's
So
funny that
these
you
are
said
all things we're going to see. Yeah.
because Tommy Lynn's, when Tommy Lynn Sells would talk
Mhm.
about how, by the way, just another, just not as, obviously not as well known
Mhm.
serial killer, spree killer. But I think he was a serial killer, but he would talk about how it
A
was,
serial killer.
yeah,
Mhm.
it was almost orgasmic to watch the eyes
Oh yeah.
fade, for the life to leave out of them, which is, for any normal human being is just a horrendous thought, in every way, shape, and form. But we'll check this
Absolutely.
out.
Well, we're going to see that the dehumanization is very important. I mean, there's a story told about a woman who was nearly killed by Bundy, who he dropped off after picking her up because she was talking too much about her life. And in doing so, she became boring to him. She had a personality. He wasn't interested in that. He wanted the person to be sort of a blank slate. Now, why is that? Because this childhood stuff we're talking about, where he's angry at this original source, right? What I've called in the literature, in the field, prototype, right? I remember when that term got used on Dateline, that I came up with. I was so excited by that. But I call that the prototype. The prototype
Yes.
is that initial person you're mad at, and then you go out and you look for a surrogate victim to project that onto, right? Like a movie director that goes out casting the part and has to find someone that fits the role, and then can play out. And for Bundy, we're going to see that for Bundy, they were so interchangeable. Like when he got to Lake Sam and he picked up Naslin and Ott, if you really read the police reports from that incident, where he got bold and took two victims with him at the same time, he was actually stopping women every 15 minutes. He was outside the bathroom and he would just find women he thought were cute, and he'd give his name, his real name, Ted, and he would ask them, if they wanted to help him with the sailboat, and he found two that were willing.
Yeah.
And that's how interchangeable they were. And the interesting thing about that is when they asked Ted, there's a whole theory about why would he use his real name, and the idea was that he knew that he might know someone there, and what he was afraid of was that if he was trying to lure one of these women and he gave a fake name, somebody might call to him from across the crowd, "Hey, Ted, how you doing?" And so he figured he might as well use his real name because one of the women that he was trying to pick up would, and don't forget that he didn't really think it had much practical value when he was finished with them. They weren't going to be telling anybody
Right.
about
Yeah.
him.
It doesn't matter if they knew his name or
Um,
not, as long as they.
right. So right. So exactly. So that I am particularly horrified by the Naslin and Ott story. Of all the victims, for some reason, I have the hardest time with that, and perhaps Kimberly Leach. There's something that's an extra degree of evil in those killings, which we'll discuss. But anyway, so if you want to kind of go from where you're at in the history, I just wanted to sort of color it in a little
Well,
bit
really quick, I wanted to
by
tell you, I
foreshadowing
actually
some of the
I
the
I had
darkness
a
that we're
young
going to
lady
see
that
here.
worked for me, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and I talked about this on After Dark the other, or while talking about this upcoming show, that her mother was from Tacoma. Maybe it was, I think it was Tacoma, but he
Mhm.
she ran across Bundy and he tried the boat trick with them. And she realized
Oh,
it, after he was caught and everything. They went, after everything was discussed, they went, "Oh my god!" Luckily, and there, I saw some comments even before this that there are people that know people that had turned Bundy down and encountered him,
yeah,
and I mean, it's
absolutely. Well,
absolutely.
well, well Bundy is like the Forrest Gump of the true crime world. He seems to
He
be
really is.
everywhere in every place at the same time. And one of the members of the Cold Case Foundation, Francine Bardole, is probably one of the most important experts on DNA in the country, if not the world, has spoken publicly about the fact that her son was babysat by Ted Bundy.
Right.
Ted Bundy was their neighbor and her babysitter for her
I
kid.
remember, I think that was on the Interview Room, right?
Yes, I think she discussed it on the interview room, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. And I've talked personally to people who've had encounters with him and told me stories that I thought were fascinating. Don't forget, I appeared on a couple of series where people had recordings of Bundy, where I've also, gotten to listen to his voice at length. And I won't reveal anything that hasn't been revealed already on those shows, but I can discuss some of that. But like, for example, I was on the show Killers on Tape, Violent Minds Killers on Tape for Oxygen Peacock. I got to hear the recording of Al Carlisle's initial assessment, his risk assessment of Bundy when he was first arrested. Remember the first arrest where he gets like pulled over with the
Yeah.
rape kit and the mask and the crowbar and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, I got to listen to the recording of that, and see the psychological testing responses and everything else. And I mean, I'll give you an example of a story I heard about him from discussion with somebody who knew him. Was that when he was younger, I think as a teenager, he there was a country club nearby, near the home, and he would sneak in and go into the room where the workers kept their clothes and stuff. And he would put on a waiter's tuxedo. And then he would go out into the crowd of people that were attending the country club and he would pretend to be a guest and see if he could get away with it. And I think what you're seeing there is already the start of the process of being an imposter, seeing if you can use your phony empathy to, warm people up to you and get them to like you and believe things. Andrew Cunanan, the spree killer Andrew Cunanan, did something very similar. He would go to big parties and things and try to inveigle himself in and meet celebrities by being all done up to the nines and would make stories up just to impress them. It was very important to him to inflate his ego and feel that he was kind of narcissistically special. And of course, Cunanan, much like Bundy, gets triggered by a rejection.
And he was the killer of
Very,
Gianni Versace, but I mean, he on his way to doing that, uh,
oh yeah,
he killed many more, and maybe
plenty
we'll.
more. Well, he wanted to kill Madonna. He wanted to kill Madonna and some other people, but he killed Versace because he couldn't get to the people he wanted, and the goal was simply to kill a celebrity.
Yeah.
We see that same behavior, I believe, in the guy that tried to kill Trump, Crooks,
Yes.
because what was on his phone indicated that he just wanted a famous person for a target, and not everyone that he had an idea about was a Republican. He just wanted to kill a famous person.
go down in history.
That is a interesting phenomenon. But for Bundy, it just had to do with killing a woman that matched the prototype in the sense that they were a person that seemed kind, attractive, had their life ahead of them, whatever, but might be full of crap. Like that was what he was projecting onto them. Like this is all a show. Like, you're uppity, you're going to reject me. You think you're better than I am. If you saw what I really came from, you wouldn't think I was this handsome, kind of suave dude. You would think I was a loser, that kind of thing.
Well,
And
one of the things about Ted Bundy that made him so absolutely dangerous is he was the definition of a wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean,
oh yeah.
he was just kind of a, if you look at him and then Richard Ramirez, which one would you stay away from? I mean, Richard Ramirez looked like the kind of guy that you did not want to be around. Ted Bundy was the kind of guy that was just sort of around, he was just there, and he was.
Oh,
I've heard people call him charming and good looking. I never found him to be, that good looking, but I mean, maybe at the time, he was normal. He was just kind of normal looking and well spoken and things like that. So that's really what made him so dangerous, like you said, that he was an apex predator. I mean, that's exactly what he was. We'll go ahead here in 1951. Let's see. Luis met Johnny Culpepper Bundy, who
mm,
actually died in 2007. He was a hospital cook at an adult singles night, but they met at an adult singles night in Tacoma's First Methodist Church. Sounds like a fun time. They married later that year, and Johnny formally adopted Ted. Johnny and Louise conceived 4 children together. And though Johnny tried to include his adopted son in camping trips and other family activities, Bundy remained distant from him. Bundy would later complain to his girlfriend that Johnny was not his real father, wasn't very bright, and didn't make much money. I don't
right.
know. I mean, I don't know the significance of that. Was he an elitist? I mean, what was that?
I think it figures into the need for, being somebody that's special, in
Yeah.
some one way or another, part of the elite. See, that's why I think it's so interesting that in death he has been elevated as if he was some kind of hero within the circle of the most evil people. That he's like a kind of a like the worst of the worst kind of a thing, because he had in life such a need for exceptionalism, and
Yeah.
when people are attracted to him and they do that, they don't realize that they're playing right along. It's sort of like the people that go around talking about how adorable Koberger is, the guy accused in the Idaho case, right? Or what they do with Luigi Mangione, the guy accused in the CEO shooting. It's like a kind of it's a clue of what might be going on in the personality structure of the individual, that people have that need to venerate and put the person on a pedestal. You see that with certain political figures, or and that kind of thing. It's like when there's that constant need to be clapped at, and paid attention to, and accurate. And the interesting thing is that people will play right along with it. That they won't notice your faults. They'll think that everything you do can be twisted into a narrative in which you are a very good and strong person. This is very common also in psychopaths, because remember that psychopathy was once very adaptive. I mean, a psychopath was somebody who took care of you and was strong and fearless. And so there is a tendency to think in a hardwired way, wow, if we need someone to rip the saber-toothed tiger apart, it I guess, Ugo, the local psychopath is the guy to make the leader, right? Ugo sounds like a good name for a troglodyte psychopath. So, but you have to picture that, right? Like the psychopath that is fearless and shameless and ferocious, right? So you think they're a leader. So you say, you know what? You may not be doing things that I think are the most moral, but Ugo gets things done.
Right.
You know what I mean? We'll
Right.
always have dinner, that kind of thing. And you're going to see that it's very easy to accidentally become attracted for that reason to a psychopath. And also, I don't think it's a coincidence that psychopathy. There's a whole world of theories about it, but congenital psychopathy may have a lot to do with testosterone, and it's possible that it can just be attractive even in an animal way. It's possible that some of these guys had certain facial features or body types that are just animalistically attractive, in ways that we have to think about, right? That are kind of interesting. But I think, look, I mean, there's no denying that Bundy is certainly put on a pedestal as an attractive person. If you were to show a photograph of Bundy to a lot of people, let's say you put Bundy on a dating site and people didn't recognize him, I think you'd get a lot of hits on Hinge, don't you?
Yeah,
I think
probably.
Ramirez would too. I think Ramirez would, don't you?
No, I don't think Ramirez would. I think
I mean,
Bundy
he
would.
was dirty and had a halitosis, but I think he had a kind of pop star look. I mean, for God's sake,
I
the
guess
woman
as
who
long
became
as
obsessed with him,
if he combed his hair,
well,
maybe.
maybe. I mean, Doreen, who was obsessed with him, used to be the person who did Tiger Beat magazine. She thought that he looked kind of like um, John Stamos.
John Stamos is attractive, but I don't think.
She thought that Ramirez had that going on.
No, no way. She's off on that, I think. I mean, that's just, but come on now. John Stamos. Bundy varied his recollections of Tacoma in later
What she
years.
thought.
um, said to attorney and author Paulie Nelson, he said that he pursued detective magazines and crime novels for stories that included sexual violence, particularly when these stories were illustrated with pictures of dead or maimed women. In a letter to Rule,
Yes.
however, he asserted that he never ever read fact detective magazines and shuddered at the thought that anyone would. He once told Mashad that
Michaud.
he would consume large quantities of alcohol and canvass the community late at night to search of undraped windows where he could observe women undressing or whatever else he could see. Psychologist Al Carlisle claimed that
Carlisle, the one I
Bundy,
mentioned.
yeah,
Yeah.
Bundy started fantasizing about women when he saw while window peeping or elsewhere and mimicking the accents of some politicians he listened to on the radio. In essence, he was fantasizing about being someone else and someone very important, going back to his adopted father. Bundy's childhood.
And the country club behavior.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And Josh, don't miss the when you're peeping, there's a difference between peeping on somebody who is awake and putting panties on, a bra, or whatever, and a person who's sleeping or in bed. Remember that when Bundy was a kid, the story with the knives,
Yeah.
what's the feature that jumped? Now, most people are going to focus on the knives being disturbing, but do you remember where he put them?
Well, didn't he just put them around her? Like
Yeah,
circular?
but read it. See where it's what it says about where he put the knives.
Um,
Those little details are very important when we're dealing with the symbolism that gets played out by these guys.
let's see here. Hold on. The first.
Remember where she was?
Yeah, I'm gonna find it. Hold on one second. That was way too far back. Let's see. Family
And
and
I
friends.
want to emphasize that
Here
that
it is.
happened when he was, yes.
She was in her bed.
Correct. And how old was he at the time?
He was 3.
So this is very important because that argues against the notion that his interest in people who are sleeping or dead, look like they're sleeping, does not only come in puberty. It's not like a true sexual thing for him. It has some significance that we don't understand that has something to do with pre-sexual stuff. For example, when we talk about Koberger, if Koberger's guilty, I don't think it's coincidence that he went in when people were in bed. There's a significance to that. You do it in the dark and the person is sleeping, then you have complete control over them. But there's another element to it, right? The importance of breaking into someone's house when they're asleep, like Ramirez used to do,
Yeah.
is that cloaked in darkness. Darkness is like a costume. You could be whatever you want in the dark. If you're insecure about what you are, you don't have to be insecure in the dark. And when someone's asleep, it's very favored by people who have great insecurities about their physical appearance and people who have great insecurities about powerlessness and things like that, right? So the idea is you go in the dark, and in the dark you're whatever you want to be.
Mm.
Think of Robert Hansen, the serial killer that hunted prostitutes in the forest. Robert Hansen would shoot the victims in the back. Why? Because if they turned around and looked at him, they would see that he was a nobody. He was a pathetic little guy, nothing, with a guy with a funny way of speaking, short, very plain looking. But in
Mm.
the darkness, running behind them, he was like a god, right? So I think for Bundy, the sleeping person or the dead person or the darkness, or whatever, it was very empowering for him because the person can't see him. You have power over the body, and there's no way for the person to judge you or
Right.
reject you. Right? It's total domination, total predictability. And that's the part I want to emphasize. The obsession with predictability is not a sexual thing. It has to do with instability in your childhood objects. And that's what he had, right? Instability, unpredictability. And of course, from a young age, when there had been aggression in him too, in conjunction with that need for control. And there's even a thought about, that he might have been not even fully in puberty when he killed for the first time. We're going to see that there's a suspicion of that. So that again, it raises the question of whether it was really a sexual thing for him, right? It seems to have something to do with predictability. So,
Yeah.
if you want to go from there.
Yeah. It's just so let's see here. Sandy Holt described this as a childhood neighbor, described him as a bully and a mean-spirited kid. He liked to terrify people, Holt later said. He liked to be in charge. He liked to inflict pain and suffering and fear. She also said that Bundy engaged in animal cruelty, which is a staple in serial killers. It seems like something
Well,
kids.
well, it depends. It is a little bit of a myth that what you're talking about is the McDonald triad, where bedwetting, animal cruelty, and fire setting are supposed to be predictive of serial killing. If
Yeah.
you look at the meta-analyses that have been done, which are these very careful, large-scale studies where you take what's been published and like amass it and look at it as if it's one big study, it turns out that you really need two of those. It's not enough to torture animals. Like if you're torturing animals and wetting the bed, then you'd be at risk. But if you're just torturing animals, you're not, believe it or not. You need to have two of them. And,
You're just an
but
animal.
he's certainly, hmm?
You're
What'd you
just
say?
you're just sick if you're torturing animals.
Well, because it could, for example, abused children sometimes take things out on animals.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you say, let's see, he'd take them. Okay, so here is kind of strange, but she claimed that Bundy would take younger children in the neighborhood into the woods and terrorize them. He'd take them out there, strip them down, take their clothes. She said you'd hear them screaming for blocks. I mean, no matter where we were, we could hear them screaming. Holt added that Bundy built makeshift punji traps around his neighborhood, injuring at least one girl. One little girl went over the top of one of Ted's tiger traps and got the whole side of her leg split open with the sharpened point of the stick that she landed on. Accounts of Bundy's social life also varied. He told journalists Michaud and Answorth that he chose to be alone as an adolescent because he was unable to understand interpersonal relationships. He also claimed to have no natural sense of how to develop friendships. I didn't know what made people want to be friends, uh, Bundy claimed. I didn't know what underlay social interactions. Some people perceived me as being shy and introverted, he said. I didn't go to dances. I didn't go on the beer drinking outings. I was a pretty, you might call me straight, but not social outcast in any way. classmates from Woodrow
He
Wilson.
totally. Forgive me, Josh,
No,
but he was totally transactional. He didn't understand that a person could want to know you because they just like you. Now, I have to tell you that is a characteristic of a few different types of people, right? You could see it in paranoids. You could see it in people that are autistic. You can see it in people who have been very badly hurt in life. You can see it in psychopaths. But it's that sort of thing of what am I giving you? It doesn't make any sense that you want to talk to me unless you're getting something from
right,
me, right? And this is very common also in people who've had developmental issues where they grew up in a kind of a situation where there was some sort of problem or chaos or whatever, and they couldn't figure out why. So they blamed it on themselves. They said, it must be me. I'm just fundamentally different or broken or whatever. And those kinds of people also have that feeling of, you know, that it doesn't make any sense. Like there's nothing, so I'm fundamentally broken, so you must be getting something out of me. Like otherwise, what are you talking to me for, right?
sure,
And
right,
Bundy kind of had that going on. I think that if you knew Bundy at that time, especially, if you were kind of able to get a little bit beyond the phony narcissistic presentation, which he had from a very young age, you would have seen that he was a deeply empty, pathetic soul that would have probably asked you endlessly what you wanted from him. Like, why are you my friend? What am I doing for you? It doesn't make any sense. Whatever. And because he would have been a deeply, deeply insecure guy. And it's very important to understand that because we think of him like the apex predator that's going around cocky. But anyone who really knew this guy knew that underneath it, it was like you tapped him and there was this profound insecurity. No matter what he looked like, no matter what he achieved, he always, before he turned into a murderer, he was somebody that had that pathetic core. Now we all know people like that, in life. It's sort of sad, but sometimes your prior life experiences rob you of the ability to have the joy in life of just believing that someone could love you.
right. Well,
Yeah.
classmates from Woodrow Wilson High School, however, told Rule that Bundy was well known and well liked. He was a
Mhm. Yeah.
medium-sized fish in a large pond. His only significant
But you
athletic
never knew him well. You knew him distantly. If you knew him well, it was a whole different animal.
obviously you could tell from his childhood neighbor. His only athletic avocation was downhill skiing, which is a
Mhm.
sport which he pursued enthusiastically with stolen equipment and forged lift tickets. During high school, Bundy was arrested at least twice on suspicion of burglary and motor vehicle theft. At age 18, the details of the incidents were expunged from his record, as is customary in Washington and many other states. And after graduating from high school in 1965, Bundy attended the University of Puget Sound,
Mhm.
what was it, UPS, for 1 year before transferring to the University of Washington to study Chinese. In 1967, he became romantically involved with a University of Washington classmate, Diane Edwards, identified
Yeah.
in Bundy's
Very important figure.
yes,
Very
sir,
important figure. Yeah.
biographies by several pseudonyms, most commonly Stephanie Brooks. Bundy later described Edwards as the only woman I really ever loved. And in
Mhm.
1968, Bundy dropped out of college and worked a series of minimum wage jobs. He also volunteered at the Seattle office of Nelson Rockefeller presidential campaign and became Arthur Felcher's driver and bodyguard during Felcher's campaign for lieutenant governor of Washington state. Edwards graduated in the spring of 1968 and left Washington for San Francisco. Bundy visited her later that year after he earned a scholarship to study Chinese at Stanford University that summer. In August, Bundy attended the 1968 Republican National Convention in Miami. Shortly thereafter, Edwards ended their relationship and returned to her family home in California, frustrated by what she described as Bundy's immaturity and lack of ambition. Uh, Lewis would later
There's,
pinpoint.
very important, Josh, to jump in
Sure,
and say something.
please do.
So in that patch that you read, um, the audience may have noticed that there were a lot of different crimes mentioned: theft, right? Forging checks,
Right.
things like that, right? Now, in the world of psychopathy, if we look at the work of Hare, who developed the psychopathy checklist, for example, and really picked up on Keckley's idea of psychopathy and kind of expanded it into what we understand to be psychopathy. And that's called criminal versatility. Criminal versatility is a real indicator that a person isn't just some low grade antisocial who commits one type of crime, but is a real psychopath, a person who really lacks that remorse and likes outsmarting people and gets off on that, is going to do it in a lot of different ways. And so it's not uncommon in a psychopath to find out that they did everything from, set fires to beat the crap out of people, take their money, assaulting people, writing bad checks, losing many, many jobs because of, stealing from the job, things like that. The other thing that isn't really that picked up on in all of the psychopathy literature that I think is very important is the instability of relationships. That it's not uncommon, for example, for a psychopath to have many, many marriages or many, many relationships or many jobs or whatever, because there is that instability of in their life, right? They can't make anything last. They could hide it a few months or a few years, and then out comes the psychopathic truth, and then the relationship falls apart or whatever, right? So, and there are a lot of serial killers we'll see that when they lose an object like Edwards, they suddenly feel out of control.
Yeah.
They're not pulling the strings anymore,
Yeah, and you
right?
could see here where they talked about him working a series of minimum wage jobs, and his girlfriend became upset with him because she thought
Yeah.
basically he wasn't
So he
ambitious,
was a
and
loser. Yeah.
yeah, and that to him, I mean, if you talk about his father, is who he said was just a nobody. I mean, that's how he felt about him. So devastated by the breakup, Bundy traveled to Colorado and then farther east, visiting relatives in Arkansas and Philadelphia. Back to the Forrest Gump of the true crime stories. And enrolling for a semester at Temple University. During his studies, he frequently visited New York City, where he was drawn to pornography. He immersed himself in violent pornographic literature while nursing his wounds from the breakup. It was also at this time, in early 1969, Rule believed that Bundy discovered uh, uh, his true parentage in Vermont. Bundy
Mhm.
returned to Washington in fall of 1969, where he met Elizabeth Cloper. How do I pronounce that?
I think it's pronounced Klopfer.
Okay. Identified in Bundy's literature as Meg Anders, Beth Anders, or Liz Kendall, a single mother from Ogden, Utah, who worked as a secretary at the University of Washington School of Medicine. And their tumultuous relationship would continue well past his initial incarceration in Utah in 1976. Bundy became a father figure to Clofar's daughter, Molly, who was 3 years old when he started dating her mother. He remained in her life until she was age 10 after he had been arrested. Uh, As an adult, Molly wrote of incidents beginning at age 7, which Bundy was abusive or sexually inappropriate with her. And her accounts include Bundy hitting her in the face, knocking her down, putting her at risk of drowning, indecent exposure, and sexual touching, disguised as accident or games. In mid 1970, Bundy, now focused and goal oriented, re enrolled at the University of Washington. This time as a psychology major. He became an honor student and was well regarded by his professors. In 1971, he took a job at Seattle's Suicide Hotline Crisis Center, which is interesting. There he met and worked alongside Ann Rule, a former Seattle police officer and aspiring crime writer, who would later write one of the definitive biographies, The Stranger Beside Me,
Right. She
Rule,
was really a nice person, by the way, Anne Rule. I want to pause here, if it's okay,
of
and tell
course,
a story that is essential, I think, to understanding Bundy's brain, if that's okay. Is
please
that all
do.
right?
Of course.
So, um, when Bundy is involved with Klopfer, there is some killing going on, right, in the timeline. And you're going to see that Bundy was engaging in a kind of compartmentalization of his personality. Now, remember we talked about Al Carlisle having spoken to Bundy, having been the psychologist who
Yeah.
talked to him when he was first arrested. Carlisle had a hypothesis. He was developing it at the same time that the that Quantico was being developed, and talking, to serial killers, along with my dear friend Ann Burgess, right? My colleague Ann Burgess. She's they're studying serial killers in that really groundbreaking way. Well, Carlisle was sort of in tandem, in parallel, doing the same thing in Utah. And he had this theory that serial killers, many of them were people who were basically traumatized and dissociated. And that's why you saw this compartmentalization, that there was an unconscious sort of, sticking into a box certain feelings, that they would come out when a person was humiliated. It was almost close to what you could see in PTSD. Dennis Rader, the serial killer Dennis Rader, has talked about it, to Catherine Ramsland, another dear friend of mine, as cubing, which is very different than compartmentalization. Because in cubing, you know that you're doing it. You're simply showing a different part of the self to the victim. So you say, okay, I've got to show this person my confident side. I've got to show this person my vulnerable side. And you're using it to manipulate. So in other words, you're talking to a person, and at the same time, you could be thinking about killing them. That's different than compartmentalization. Now, where does that come in with Klopfer? Well, Klopfer represents what looked like a healthy relationship on the surface, but he was killing at the same time.
Right.
And what you're going to see in a lot of these offenders is, and I've talked about this to a lot of people, is this phenomenon where they don't like. Now, remember what I said about the darkness. They don't like that people don't really know what they are. They want to pull the curtain away and go, see, you think I'm this weak jerk? Like, this is what I really am. I go out at night and I kill people and I'm stronger than them and whatever. So sometimes they'll do things right under your nose. They'll hide photographs. They'll, the like when Rader had the photos in the house, Polaroids of himself, in the victim's outfits and things hidden, so that if somebody could just find them, they would know what he was. Well, um, with Bundy, there's a story told that he had killed a victim. Now, I think I have kind of tried to patch together who it would have been. I think it was probably Donna Mason, but he killed one of the victims and he was keeping her head. And one day, Liz comes home. I think she's got a kid and everything. And he's got this head that he's engaging in necrophilic acts with. So what does he do? He throws it into her fireplace and burns it.
The
So now you've
hell?
got to picture this tableau, right? Woman comes home to what she thinks is a pleasant relationship. Maybe she's got the kid in tow, right? And
Yeah.
everybody's talking and having a normal time. And there, smoldering in the fireplace, in the little oven, is the head of a woman that was like dragged off to the forested mountain area and killed and decapitated and had her head assaulted and kept alive with makeup and everything. And then, just as that split is going to be bridged, right? The woman comes in, she could catch him, and everything could be discovered. He just throws it into the fire. And think of that fireplace as symbolic of the compartmentalization process. Just throwing it in there, hiding it, burning it up, keeping it. So it's very disturbing, but you have to understand this construct of compartmentalization
Yeah.
in order to understand these guys, right? And
But it's cubing.
he kept that story very secret for a long time. What were you going to ask, Jeff?
I said instead of compartmentalization, it's cubing.
It's more like Cuban. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Which is
so.
very interesting and something that probably not a lot of people know about. I certainly don't. Um,
That's what we're
let's
here for, Josh. Those of us who have to spend all day listening to this crap. Oh, yeah.
After graduating from University of Washington in 1972, Bundy joined Governor Daniel J. Evans' reelection campaign. Posing as a college student, he shadowed Evans' opponent, former Governor Albert Rossellini, and recorded his stump speeches for analysis by Evans' team. Evans subsequently appointed Bundy to the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. I mean, you can't make that up. After Evans was reelected, Bundy was hired as an assistant to Ross Davis, chairman of the Washington State Republican Party. Davis thought well of Bundy and described him as a smart, aggressive, and a believer in the system. In early 1973,
Did you know you notice Daniel Evans and Diane Edwards have the same initials? I
yeah,
always thought that was fascinating. Yeah, right. You go from one figure that rejects you, who's got you on the pedestal, right? Who makes you feel you're on a pedestal, rejects you. Now you fall, you go out, you find another person who puts you back on the pedestal, right? Who boosts your ego again. I always thought it was interesting that
oh,
they have the same initial.
look at the comment here. Josh, I said on your show 3 years ago that I was one of the girls that he stalked in Salt Lake City in the mud 70s. I also said on Prairie Gardens, everyone ignored me. Yeah, I do. I remember that. And I said yesterday that there would probably be people in this chat that may have had personal encounters or, one-offs or people, somebody that knew him, so it's absolutely terrifying. And by the way, it is a great lesson for people to, um, to learn, that even though, that there is Bundy's gone, there are people out there just like him still to this day
Oh, no, no
that
question.
will stalk you and try to trick you. And so, being hyper vigilant is just you can learn a lot by Bundy and the things that he did by being hyper vigilant and really avoiding
Oh, yeah.
bad, terrible situations. Okay. So
Remember in Little Red Riding Hood in Stephen Sondheim's musical Into the Woods, she's sort of strangely attracted to the wolf, and yet the wolf wants to kill her. And she sings, "Be careful when with strangers, even flowers have their dangers, and nice is different than good."
yes, it certainly
Very,
is.
very important to understand. Nice does not mean good. These two things have absolutely nothing to do with one another. And, he could really masquerade as nice. I'm sure he was being very nice to Liz when she strolled in and he hurled the head in the fireplace.
Absolutely. So, despite his mediocre LSAT scores, Bundy was accepted into law schools um, of University of Utah, UPS, and the University of Utah on the strength of letters of recommendations from Evans, Davis, and several University of Washington psychology professors. During a trip to California on a Republican Party business in the summer of 1973, Bundy rekindled his relationship with Edwards. She marveled at his transformation into a serious and dedicated professional, seemingly on the cusp of a significant legal and political career. Bundy continued to
Marveled. Don't you love that word? She
marvel.
marveled.
Yes, she
Like she
did.
stood there and looked at him like, wow. Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah. Klopfer, he continued to date Klopfer. Neither woman was aware of the other's existence. In the fall of 1973, Bundy matriculated at UPS Law School and continued courting Edwards, who flew to Seattle several times to stay with him. They discussed marriage and at one point introduced her to Davis as his fiance. And in January of 1974, Bundy abruptly broke off all contact with Edwards. Her phone calls and letters went unreturned. When she finally reached him by phone months later, she demanded to know why he unilaterally ended their relationship without explanation. In flat, calm voice, he replied, "Diane, I have no idea what you mean, and hung up. She never heard from him again. Bundy later explained, I just wanted to prove myself that I could have married her, which is
Yeah.
chilling. I mean,
It's
what a
Isn't that
manipulative.
depressing?
Yeah, that's just what a, it's such a jerk move. But jerk was one of the nicer things about him, I guess. But Edwards concluded in retrospect that Ted's high powered courtship in the latter part of 1973 had been deliberately planned, that he wanted all those years to be in position of where he could make her fall in love with him so that he could drop her, reject her as she had rejected him. By then,
Right.
Bundy had begun skipping classes at law school. By April, he stopped attending entirely as women began to disappear in the Pacific Northwest. And there is no
Mhm.
consensus as to when or where Bundy began killing women. He told different stories to different people and refused to divulge the specifics of his earliest crimes.
I mean, there's even one theory that he killed for the first time on a paper route when he was very, very young. And there are some people that think he didn't start killing until he went out west. And this is really unclear. Now, in the source you're reading, who does it give as the first canonical victim, the first established victim? I'm just curious because it changes according to what you
Let
read.
me see here.
Who do they give?
Said he didn't kill him.
Because there's also a whole theory about him even potentially killing in Atlantic City in the 1960s. That's a whole
Yeah.
other theory that is kind of interesting. That's a theory that got explored on another series I did.
It
Oh
doesn't
Lord, I
actually.
can't remember
It doesn't
the
say.
name of it.
All it says here is he told psychologist Art Norman that he killed two women in Atlantic City while
Right, that
visiting
was another theory. Yeah.
in
Hmm.
Philadelphia. Bundy hinted to a homicide detective, Robert Keppel, that he committed a murder in Seattle in 1972 and another murder in 1973 involved a hitchhiker
Hmm.
um,
Right. And
near
yeah,
somewhere.
and it's interesting because when I did that series, it was for Oxygen. I got some reason I just can't remember what the heck that series was called. I'll look it up. But on this series, they there was some recordings or something of Bundy, and they went out and they talked to people who knew him, and on the show they discussed that Bundy had one girlfriend that was not really known prior to this, and they sort of called her in for an interview, and she said that when they were dating, he would go with her to a swimming hole and he would dunk her head underwater. That he seemed to like to see how long she could keep her head underwater, and the little bubbles would come up, and he'd get kind of aroused by that. If I seem to even remember her saying that he would get aroused by it. I'm not sure, but I got to look back at that. If she didn't say it, I'm pretty sure it's true. But the idea is that he would have been excited about the idea of breath. We see this is a topic that is very important in the life of Bundy when we look at his particular mechanism of killing. In
Right.
some murderers, there's a very clear reason why. For example, Kenneth Bianchi, one of the the two stranglers. Remember Buono and Bianchi
Mhm.
were killing young women together and
Yeah.
eventually engaged in torture. The hillside stranglers. I always remember Bianchi complaining to a reporter about my book but that's another story altogether. But Bianchi had a father that died of a pulmonary condition when he was a kid, who left him with a mother that he despised. And he seemed to have a fascination with the idea of arbitrating who lived and who died and when through strangulation, through asphyxiation, right? In his case, it's sort of clear why that might have been psychologically. It's interesting to think about why Bundy might have had that particular fixation, but we know that there would have been a lot of like use of ligature to strangle victims, right? Um, there is a movie that came out some years ago. There have been a few of them, but there's a movie called Bundy, which depicts very horribly him picking up a woman and bringing her to the forests out in the Midwest, the Pacific edge there, and he's in the virtually pitch dark in the forest with her, and she is like on her knees. And he basically takes his belt off and wraps it around her neck and is pulling on it, and she's choking, and he's screaming into the night, that no one would. Um, no, that's a different one, Kelsey. Um, Screaming into the night, that no one can hear him or whatever. And he says, "I am God in these woods. I am God," and then he's strangling her to death, right? So that this whole idea, think about all throughout the Bible, for example, God breathing into the dust and making man, Christ breathing the Holy Spirit onto the apostles. Right? The breath has always been symbolic of life in the Judeo-Christian world. If you've ever worked as a nurse or a doctor or been in a hospital room and you've seen someone die, you'll experience it as if you can see or feel the breath slip out of them as they die, right? And that's very important to get into your head if you want to understand the psyche of this guy, that he felt something like God.
Yeah, my grandmother on my father's side, when she was in hospice, I was holding her hand when she passed, and you know
You
the
know,
her grip went, because she had a it was a strong grip because she was just clinging to life, but it was sort of just the extinguishing of life. Like I'd never quite seen it like that, that up close, and it was something to behold. And I tell you that I'm glad that I was able to be there with her um, while that was happening. But yes, you're exactly right. You can see it's almost like the whole room, just can feel
yeah,
what has just happened,
yeah.
and not even
He
that.
would love it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He would,
So
and he would have been very turned on by the last breath, the death rattle, that kind of thing. Because we know that, for example, with one of his girlfriends during sex, he would require her to pretend she was dead and not make a breath. She had to have her eyes open, not move a muscle, not breathe one drop in order for him to achieve orgasm with her. And that this is a preoccupation that he had.
yeah.
For some reason, there are different reasons a person could have that interest, but the person had to be completely lifeless. I mean, just think about that, right? So you're already getting a person who's aroused by, "I'm watching you through a window and you don't know it," right? "I'm aroused by," we know he gets into violent pornography. He blamed that for a lot of his crimes. He certainly was watching that. I don't know if that caused his crimes, but it certainly fueled some of his interests. He is sexually aroused by that quality of a person looking like they're dead, and he's sexually aroused by toying with the breath. So you have to
Right.
picture all these things like a confluence of these into his particular ritual, right? And then outsmarting the woman is the other piece of it.
So what did you want to so we got a couple things that we're going to play here, and
Oh
then
yeah, 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 yeah,
there was also
yeah.
something that you wanted
Well,
to read as well, correct? What did you want to do
yes.
for
Well, that's going to be about Leach, the Kimberly Leach at the end. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the Naslin and Ott murders because there's a great mystery of what happened to them. That's the two young women who were picked up at Lake Sam, which we talked about earlier, right? When every 15 minutes he was hitting on someone. And if you watch that movie that I just mentioned, the Bundy movie, they depicted what they think, their fantasy of what happened, right? Which is that he has one of the victims chained up to a pipe in a little cabin, and he is committing an assault, a sexual assault against the other woman while the other one's watching, and then he kills her with a giant rock over the head, and then the other victim knows what's going to happen to her, right? There's also some speculation about him sort of chasing them around in the forest or, being afraid and all that. Well, Schaefer, another terrible serial killer, George Schaefer, a sexually sadistic serial killer, claimed that Bundy revealed to him in jail when they shared a cell what he did to Ott and Naslund. And those who are interested in the Bundy case who don't already know this would probably be fascinated to see Schaefer's account of what happened to Naslund and Ott, supposedly. And so we have this footage of Schaefer describing it. And notice Schaefer claims that Bundy was sort of admiring him, that he was killing women using techniques that came from Schaefer, which I doubt, but anyway, so, and I think let's trigger alert to some people that this will be horrifying. But I think if you want to hit play on that, I think people will find it really interesting.
Sure.
Copycat crime.
Look at him. I can't even look at Schaefer. Look at his face.
I think
It looks like the penguin.
Yeah, he kind of does. Yeah, he looks like he should be going.
As a copycat crime, so to speak, on the place of Jessup. And I think those were Ott and Naslund. And he would tell me that he took them up on the logging road and strangled them and had sex with their corpses and went back and had sex with their corpses and cut off their heads. Like, it's a tribute. And I'm thinking, you motherfuckers that wrote that. I said, here's the guy who read it, believed your bullshit, and went out and did something like this. And now he's like bragging to me. It wasn't exactly a brag, it was like a tribute. How many did you get, really, Jerry? They said 34. Did they get all of them? Or do you have private graveyards? I said, Dad, I'm the best. What can I say to somebody like that, right? What can you say? You're left without any kind of rational response because of.
So this is Gerald Schaefer, who was he was incarcerated with Bundy, correct?
They're incarcerated together. They were both sexually sadistic serial killers, and they were jailed together.
And they were, you can tell that he's basically calling him a copycat killer, and said that he revealed a lot of he revealed details to him that nobody else knew. And this, I believe, this is obviously after his death, correct? After Bundy was.
This recording of him talking of Schaefer talking, I think, is after Bundy died. I have to confirm it, but I think so. Yeah.
I think it is too.
Ted, it's all bullshit. He's gonna say, no, it's not. I know. And he knew, see, because he had lived it. And I hadn't lived it, except through what was written about me. And he was doing it based on what he had read. So he had 36. He wanted to be the best. He was obsessed because they said I had 34. And he was afraid that I had ones that he didn't know about. See? And he was always trying to get me to say, no, that's all I got, 34, But I never would say that. I discerned that he was concerned about the number. And it was my own way of needling him back by saying, I'm the best, Ted. You're going to fry, and I'm going to be here. And I'll be the best, just like they said. The number one. Mr. Stone had it all right. The best there ever was. And you're nothing. And just go crazy. Can't be. And I'd take out my little thing from the Palm Beach Post. I said, read that, man. Cult.
Josh, if you stop it there, I almost hate looking at Schaefer. I find him to be one of the most slimy, disgusting of all of the serial killers. he had more of that kind of schizoid, detached, creepy lizard quality,
I mean,
unlike Bundy, who was more charming and, ugh, I mean, he's like reptilian. I can't stand looking at him. Now, what I think is a really good yin to that yang, a really good bookend to watching that is to look at video footage of Naslin's mother, who died, I believe, of cancer. She was devastated by the death of her daughter, to a point that was unfathomable. And she was very religious, and she kept a shrine, to the daughter in the house, basically. And she never moved her daughter's car. Her daughter's car was in front of the house where it had been left when the daughter went missing. And she petitioned Bundy constantly to to try to get Bundy to tell her what he had done to the daughter. And I just think it's very important to remember the victims. And so I think even just to view this, first of all, as an example of the ripple effect of victims, where it isn't only the person who died, but the family members and the people who have to hear the details and see the body and identify it and the whole thing, right? We're very big on that in the Cold Case Foundation, emphasizing the ripple effect of victims. But I also think we have to view this as like a symbol of all, because it's not there were so many victims. Some people think up to 36, so many victims of Bundy that if we sat here and went through each story, it would take, days. So I just think we will use this as like a symbol of how everyone was affected, right? And but if you want to hit play on that.
Denise
Wish I could
Naslund
have
was
went
one
on.
of the 2 women abducted from the
Yeah.
lake. This is Denise's mother.
All I can think about is what he did to her. What were her thoughts? How long did she suffer? And those thoughts are with me all the time. She left for the picnic with her friends, and about 9 o'clock that night, I saw that her boyfriend came up pulling in her car. And I knew right then there was something wrong. And he said, "I can't find Denise." He said the picnic was over with for a couple of hours, and he had been looking all over for her and couldn't find her. I knew that Denise just would not disappear like that for any reason at all.
Are you convinced that the case is solved now? Do you know who killed her?
I feel I do.
Are you satisfied?
In one way, I'm satisfied, but another way, I tell myself and pray that he would confess. I feel that my life has been completely destroyed.
Do you have any feelings for Bundy's parents?
Well, I feel sorry for them in a way, and then in another way, I feel that they should have seen something in his eyes or something somewhere about him to give them a clue that something was wrong.
See, the you have to understand that Denise Naslin's mother was extremely religious. I believe that's a statue of the Virgin Mary in front of her daughter. Um, and she was very intensely Catholic, and everything would have been shaded in that way. And she tried to make a spiritual meaning out of what had happened. You notice she says that they could have seen something in his eyes. This is somebody who I think would have seen Ted Bundy as not mentally ill or personality disordered or whatever. She would have seen him as evil, as a person who was touched by evil, like demonically possessed or something like
Sure.
that. And
I'm sure there's a lot of
that's
people that feel that
what
way.
well, that's what she's saying when she says, they should have seen something in his eyes, because if you know about Naslin's mother, you know that it was a relentless process for her to try to make sense out of this. And she wouldn't leave Bundy alone, to try to get to the bottom of it. She wanted closure. If she only knew the Schaefer story of what supposedly happened, can you imagine? And did you notice the car in front of the house?
Yeah.
Yeah. Extraordinary. And, listen, I do a lot of therapy with people who are victims of violent crime. And the effects are, forever. The effects are forever.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And we do, we do want to always focus on the victims as well. Bundy's this polarizing figure. He's the epicenter of the story, but in fact, the ripples of Bundy spread all across America and the world. I mean, we had a lady in chat that had to leave because it was something that hit close to home with her, and it's a terrible thing. And it really is. I mean, even though he's gone and off the earth and things like that, but just the effects of their crimes. I mean, they live on in infamy for decades.
Well, when you're dealing with up to 36 victims, you just imagine each of those young women, for example, might have gone on to have, let's say, a couple of children, and those children might have had children, right? I mean, enough time has gone by that there could be multiple generations that have now been wiped out by this person. And then there are the ripple effects on all the siblings of the victims and the parents of the victims and the grandparents of the victims and the friends of the victims. I mean, you have to understand these people that Bundy killed were high functioning, attractive, popular people. They weren't like the serial killer victims that are living in quiet, the people off the grid, the people that are selected because nobody will know they're gone, the hitchhikers and the sex workers and things like that. These, and even they have friends, but
Sure.
the idea of picking people right in their own communities that were popular and loved and all that, because that was part of the enjoyment for him, right? Taking that, arbitrating who loses that this time, right? And so you have to imagine, just as a thought experiment, imagine your best friend or your daughter, right? Or your female cousin or something like that, your classmate, and you're talking to them in the hall about we have a test tomorrow at college, or oh, you're going out on a date with so and so. Oh, I hope you have a good time, whatever. And then imagine the next minute you hear that they've gone missing. And for years, you have no idea what happened to them. They were there and they were gone. And then years later, it comes out that a serial killer, very rare phenomenon really at the time, serial killer has passed through your neck of the woods and plucked that person out of the world because they just happen to be the attractive person who was passing by him at that particular time. And they weren't just plucked out of the world, they were taken somewhere, and a perverse, outrageous thing was played out on them, which might have involved some degree of slow torture and probably involved sexual assault and would have involved strangulation, probably, and then might have involved them being dismembered and desecrated, possibly even never found. And then you go to the supermarket and you buy one of those crappy mass market books and you go, oh, look, a book on that guy that killed my friend or my cousin or my daughter. And you open it up to the photo section and there's a picture of her taken out of her yearbook or something, right? And all the sordid details that have been patched together on what happened. And you're supposed to just go on with your life. And it's important to understand that. Bundy was like, you know, just the human equivalent of an animal predator. It's funny, when I was a kid, this will tell you something about my psyche, Josh. When I was a kid, I wrote a story for school about a person who had a pet lizard, and they fed the lizard little flies and maggots and things. but it was written from the point of view of the things that were getting eaten by the lizard. And each of them had a personality and a family and friends and whatever. And so what the story was about is that we just think of this as like a bug or a thing that has no value. But from a certain Gary Larson Far Side point of view, imagine each of them had a personality and a life and whatever, and then they were being preyed upon. The story would become extremely sad, right? And I've always thought about that. I always imagined that you could make a whole mini series about all the people who randomly get eaten by Godzilla, or the deep, complicated life stories of the victims of the killer in a slasher movie. Maggie who gets the axe to her head in the sorority. Maybe she had an interesting life. That kind of thing. So I've always been interested in that, and that's how you have to think of Bundy. That he was like he would have thought of himself as no different than a reptile that was just eating prey.
Yeah,
Right.
that's funny.
There's one story that's what? Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
Well, the one story that's told about Georgianne Hawkins, he was told, you can hear tape recording of him talking about it on YouTube, where when he picked her up, he was very weirded out by all the little details she told about herself that humanized her. And he remembered that she told him he had bopped her on the head, and when they woke up where he took her to kill her. And it was horrible death. She kept talking about that she was preparing for like a Spanish test. And she kept talking about how she was too skinny. So she held her pants up with a safety pin. And Bundy is sitting there thinking, who cares? Like, why is she telling me these things? Like, this is stupid. Like, does she think she's going to go home? Like, this is dumb. And he's pretending to be interested in the whole thing. She's coming out of swimming to the surface, having been bopped on the head. And this is what she's talking about. And after she dies, he becomes scared that her stuff is with him. So he basically is driving around, opening the car window and throwing the stuff out along the way. And then he becomes obsessed that one of her shoes was left at the place he picked her up. And so right under the nose of the police who are looking for her, he slips in, picks up the shoe, and leaves. Totally callous. Look at the face of Georgianne Hawkins and remember her telling that to him. It becomes very unbearable, right? So, again, we can't really talk in detail about every victim, although I do want to talk about Kimberly Leach, the last victim, the youngest victim. But I think we have to try to find some way to honor them individually. I mean, Josh, you've talked about being somebody who's been affected by the ripple effect of family crime, with the murder of your mother.
Sure.
I don't know if it's something you want to talk about, that ripple effect, but
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was let's see, 30. I was 3 years old, and it was close to. It was about 35 years, 35 and a half years ago. And I was a young guy, young little dude at the time, and to this day, we still get letters from the prison. Whenever you're a victim of violent crime and you are constantly, well, I would say constantly, but you're always alerted of new things that are happening with the person that, committed the crime against you or your family. And, so quite often we still receive mail from the correctional facilities, updating us on, any trouble that he's been in, or anything, if he gets moved, his next parole hearing. And I mean, we're talking almost 36 years later. And every time it gets close to a parole hearing, and we've been through, I don't know, probably close to eight of them, maybe more. But every time that comes around, I can feel a shift in my family. I can feel
Oh,
the
yeah.
anxiousness, why are we dealing with this still? Why are we, why do we have to? And it's just not something that truly will really ever go away. Like I said, my, one of my aunts, after the murder of my mother, she moved to Germany for 10 years. She didn't want to be anywhere near what had happened. I had another aunt that had a mental breakdown.
Oh,
So these ripple effects they last forever, for as long, in fact, it used to really upset me that when my father would come up for parole, that my children, when they were younger, would get scared, and
children who never knew your mom.
never knew her, never knew my dad either. And they would become very, very scared. And it used to piss me off. And when I say piss me off, I can't think of any other words. It was almost infuriating, because at that moment, I wasn't scared of him anymore, but my children were, which is generational trauma,
Oh, yes.
What if he gets out? What if he, he's our grandpa, he's this, he's that. And I would say, he's nothing to you. Don't worry about it.
It happens. I've seen it in the children of women who have been victims of domestic violence. That the children years later, even if they didn't even consciously remember much of it or maybe even witness it, can sometimes be affected in some strange way. Because they pick it up from the mother's anxiety, from the mother's reactions to the world, from the overprotectiveness, from the messages that are imparted to the children about dating. Like when they get to be teenagers and things, older teenagers. It's a real thing, Josh.
And I'll tell you this, so when my grandfather was alive, he was kind of the one that sort of led the charge with the parole hearings. He was sort of the rock, and, everybody kind of rallied around him because he was very strong. And then when he died, it sort of became my cross to bear, as I got older, and because my grandmother, who's still alive, and I'll never forget, just sitting right next to her, and I'd never seen her do this before. And as she was talking about my mother, my grandmother's a very strong woman. She's been through a lot of stuff, and she stops. Her voice quivered. She put her hand up over her mouth and scrunched her eyes closed about as hard as you can. I'd never seen her do that before. If she had been standing, she would have probably fell. Just talking about what it had done to her life. And it was one of the hardest. It was just a terrible thing this was probably 30 years later. 30 years.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember your mother? Were you old enough that you remember the effects on your mother of the domestic violence?
No, I didn't, but my sister does and did. She was older than me. I didn't, but I'll tell you this, when I look back at photos, I can see it. I can see it on her face. The later photos of when I was, closer to 3, I could see it. Everybody else had smiles, and she wasn't smile. She didn't smile much towards the end. You could tell that her heart was heavy, and that she had a lot of worry on her face,
She probably made a lot of the decisions she made based on the fact that she had children.
Yeah, every photo that I have of with her is her either holding me or me and my sister right in front of her with her one hand on each one of our shoulders, So
That must be the hardest part, is looking at a child that you love a beautiful child that you love and knowing that they have half of the genetics of this person who was a monster.
Yeah, I dealt with that a lot. We had a caller one time that would call and talk about she had a son that father had committed murders, and it was through drug activity, I believe. He was scared that he would have a lot of the same sort of.
Yeah, they worry about that. It's
Yeah.
I've seen that in women who are victims of domestic violence will have children, and they'll bring the child to therapy because every little thing the child does, they say, "I'm afraid he's going to turn into his father.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid he's going to." I mean, this is more common somebody's got to write a book about that phenomenon.
Yeah.
That thing of over noticing problems in the child because you're trying to preempt the child going the route of the parent that had those issues.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you
A
know,
lot of my father's issues were drug and alcohol related as well.
oh
But
well, that's another common story. Yeah.
but he
Right.
he obviously wasn't wired too tight. And I'll tell you that my sister is probably one of the kindest people that I know. And I don't say that
Oh, yeah.
because she's my sister. If she was a brat, I would just flat out tell you my sister's a brat. She's not. She is one of the most compassionate, loving, giving, caring people that I've ever met. And she, you wouldn't be able to tell that what her father had done just by, speaking. You would think that she'd come from a perfect Christian family, I guess.
Well, there's a quote that I often use from Sherlock Holmes. Anyone who knows me knows how much I love Sherlock Holmes, my obsession with Sherlock Holmes and Sherlockania, which I have all over the house. Um, there's a line from there that I use when I'm teaching how to do therapy. And the line is something like, at the onset of a case, it is a good thing to know that for good or ill, there is someone in the client's life who has an exceptional nature. Now, what did he mean by that? He means that when you meet an individual and you want to size up their psychology, it's very important to know if they have a figure in their life that is either absolutely horrible or absolutely good. Because the person will have such a colossal, weighty effect on whether the person has a positive prognosis or a negative one, good outcome or a bad outcome. And when you tell your story, it becomes very clear that your grandparents had exceptional natures, right? Your sister had an exceptional nature that were positive. Your father had an exceptional nature that was awful. Your mother had an exceptional nature that was wonderful. And you always want to pay attention to that in people because it makes or breaks where a person goes on the road. If all of us sat for a moment and thought about the people who had exceptional natures in our lives who were good and really thought about how lucky we were that the crack shoot of life put those people in our path, we would burst into tears because we would realize that it was really just a chance event that that person was good to us. And it's scary when you think about that the slightest little variation in the path of life, and you could have wound up with an awful person. And it's the same thing that happens when it scares you when you meet new people, that you don't know where the crap shoot's going to go. And if they're a good person, you keep thinking,
He'll be back. The first time this happened tonight, too. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, I don't know what happened here. Uh-oh, Spaghetti-O. Every time he gets to like right at the climax of the point that he's about to make, this ends up happening. Hold on here. Let me see here. Let me see if I could turn this can. He's gone. Okay. He'll be back. I think. I don't know. Let me see here. I want to just thank some of the people. Jovi. Jovi's been here a year. Wow. That's awesome. And then great to see you as well. I think he had a major, and did he have a major internet crash? What happened? It's hey, how you doing, Dr. Gary? Well, I'm doing very good, Joshua. How are you? Oh, just hanging out. Well, that's good. Maybe he did have to go pee. I don't know what happened. See, do I have an Apple phone link for membership? I don't know. I don't know if I do. I think so. I think I do, but let me see. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. Yeah, look, you guys are Ash, we love you, Josh. Thank you for sharing such difficult memories. He's back, folks. I told you.
I have returned. I have seen the netherworld. I have come back from the abyss.
The upside
there
down.
is something on the other side.
Let me see.
Are you there, spirit? Anyway, but I'm sorry, Josh. I don't know what happened. Was that your end? Was that on your end or mine?
That was definitely yours. Absolutely, 100% your fault.
Boy, I mean, I guess the good Lord couldn't take it anymore.
I was saying every time you get to the pinnacle, you're like about to make this like and
I know.
It's like the 10 Commandments declaration, and then
Right.
it's like, ugh, and then
exactly. The meaning of life is.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So,
you know how you,
so
you
Josh,
know
don't forget, we've got to talk about Kim Leach. But go
let's
ahead.
do it.
But what were you about to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that you were about to pronounce what the fountain of youth was, and then.
Oh, I certainly don't know what it is. I remember once there was this absolutely horrible person that was involved with somebody that I knew, and I don't like to be mean to people. Like, I'm not a mean-spirited guy,
Me
you know.
neither.
And but I couldn't stand this person. I mean, I knew they were being abusive too, verbally abusive to someone I cared about. And so they were covered in perfume, I remember, like a perfume person, you know. And I leaned in I had to hug them, and it sickened me that I had to hug them goodbye. And they said, "Don't you smell what that delicious scent that I have on me? What do you think of it?" And I said, "What is it?" And they named it, and I said, "Oh, I thought it was the formaldehyde." Well, it didn't go over very well. But the point is, you know, they did have that look of like a pickled frog or something. That's something, you know, covered in formaldehyde. I'm sorry about it. But they did. They had the odor of formaldehyde to them.
Oh, that's
And
funny.
the look of it. So, should we talk about Kim Leach?
Yeah, I think we should. Yes.
Now, it's very almost strange to talk about Bundy without talking about things like that he escaped, you know, from jail, lost some weight, and was able to slip through the ceiling and got out, and how he defended himself and all these other things, became involved with, different people along the way that are all very interesting, including a juror. But we also, are not getting into the whole Chi Omega house break-in, which is worthy of its own conversation. But just in the interest of time, I mean, when he's down there in, in the South towards the tail end of things, there is this murder of Kim Leach that I really think we have to talk about. And Kim Leach was his youngest victim. And a lot of people who are into the Bundy thing will say, I don't know what happened to her. And that's on purpose. They don't They don't like to talk about what happened to Kimberly Leach because she was a little girl. Kevin Sullivan, who I consider to be like one of the foremost authorities on Bundy, did tell us, he has seen police reports and things like that, and he told us this is the second edition of the Bundy murders, which is the comprehensive history of the Bundy case. I have both editions, of course, but I like the second edition. It has some new stuff in it, and I'm just going to go ahead and read the section on Leach. Is that okay?
Please.
This is like a demented version of reading Rainbow, tonight, where we're reading all these horror. I'm like demented LeVar Burton,
Yeah.
You don't have to take my word for it, like we're reading all these horrible things,
I
But
think
I'm
Jared
just going to go ahead and
Schaefer
read this.
really set the tone.
What'd you say?
I think Schaefer set the tone on this episode.
Yeah, the creeptastic.
The
Right.
worst.
So it says, now you have to picture this as a 12-year-old girl, Kimberly Diane Leach, is her name, and it says on page 220 of the book. Although witnesses would later come forward saying they saw the white van patrolling the school that morning, no one witnessed the initial encounter between the man and Kimberly. It would surely have been remembered and possibly roused some suspicion. However, former firefighter by the name of C.L. Anderson, nicknamed Andy, who was even then approaching the school from the same direction as had Bundy after working the night shift, later testified he saw someone who looked like Bundy leaving the school holding the arm of a young girl whom he believed to have been crying, later identified as Kimberly Diane Leach. Anderson was able to get a good look at the pair because he was temporarily blocked by the white van in front of him and ongoing traffic which wouldn't allow him to pass. According to Anderson's later court testimony, the quote-unquote scowling man brought the girl to the passenger side of the vehicle, opened the door, shoved her inside, and slammed the door, then, quote, jogged around to the driver's side and drove off. Anderson, whose gaze was now riveted on the scene, said that at the time he was thinking, Daddy's going to take the little girl home and give her a spanking. The former firefighter, not wanting to get involved, would wait 6 months before telling authorities what he saw that morning. Once Bundy had cleared the school grounds, it was all over for young Kim Leach. That she resisted her abductor while in the van is virtually without dispute, as a witness spotted the van careening on the highway and heading west. Jacqueline Moore, the wife of a Lake City doctor, was heading east on US 90 when the van nearly ran her off the road, quote unquote. It must have been a very odd sight indeed. As Moore said, the driver's head kept bobbing as he looked down at something, and that his mouth was open and his jaw was slack. He was intoxicated, but not with alcohol. His intoxication was the deep and vicious craving to which he had surrendered himself so long ago. This craving, which had so utterly taken control and superseded every other aspect of his life, would never stop seeking victims as long as he was alive. On that cold and rainy February day, Bundy was on the run, completely separated from his family and friends, completely apart from everything remotely connected, not just to his former life before the killing began, but from everything one would call normal. Like the shark which travels alone through the seas and oceans looking for food, so too Theodore Bundy was moving alone on this day through oceans of people, fulfilling the only real craving he had. Fighting the way the little girl was, it was evident to our killer that the sooner he found a spot, the better he'd be. It is likely Bundy rendered the child unconscious soon after the near collision, as he still had about a 30-minute drive ahead of him. Bundy took the exit at Live Oak, some 28 miles from Lake City. At some point in this rural area, he stopped the van and raped but did not kill Kimberly Leach. Unlike his days in Washington State, when he would pick his location for a killing ground and/or dumping ground in advance, Bundy stumbled upon a small and empty hogshed with a metal roof and dragged young Leach inside the cramped scene. Cradling a knife in one hand, he forced the girl to lie on her stomach, and while having sex with her from behind, he stabbed and slashed at her throat, quickly killing her. Finally satiated, Bundy was ready to return to Tallahassee. As he entered the city limits, he quickly found a place he was comfortable with and dumped the van. He apparently took the time to wipe down those areas particularly susceptible to fingerprints, door handles, steering wheel, and any place he reasoned he might have touched, but that was about it. It would not be a wise decision, and this too would come back to haunt him. The evening after Bundy's return to Tallahassee, he took a young lady from the rooming house to dinner. Actually, it was with the stolen credit card of William R. Evans that took Miss Mesner and Bundy to dinner at a place named Chez Pierre, a posh French restaurant, the evening of February 10th. Indeed, Bundy would dine at the French eatery, courtesy of Evans' MasterCard, the night before and the night after his date. And it goes on and on and on. Well, anyway, the point is, it says that he goes on laughing, talking, swilling wine, and everything. And he had committed an assault against a 12-year-old and murdered her. And there is no doubt in my mind that the symbolism of the way he killed her was that it was in a pig shed and her throat was cut the way you would kill a pig. And it was the ultimate act of savagery, right? I don't like the image of the way pigs are killed. It horrifies me. Horror movies that pick up on that, like the abattoir, slaughterhouse thing, give me the creeps. There's something about that animalistic thing. For example, do you know where the expression kick the bucket comes from? When a person dies, you say they kick the bucket.
No, I
It
don't.
comes from slaughtering pigs. When you kill a pig, you cut the throat of the pig and you dangle it from the toe or the foot, the paw. And when the blood is pouring into the bucket underneath it before you can sell the meat, sell the pork, what's going to happen is that when the pig has finally given up the last drop of blood, it goes into a death rattle and the leg shakes and it kicks the bucket. And when it kicks the bucket, you know it's dead. The expression comes from farming and the killing of pigs in that horrible way. And it's so there's something about choosing that way of killing a child that I want people to hear and bear in mind the next time they're looking at Bundy and drooling over him. I want people to understand that you're dealing with a man whose crimes culminated in the sexual assault and slaughter, and I mean slaughter, of a child. And it's part of my mission, and I want to eat into the image people have of Bundy, because that's disgusting beyond words. What are your thoughts hearing that, Josh? I bet less than one or two people in the audience had heard that story before.
I mean, it's really just fully encompasses what a monster he really, really was. I mean, you're right about this, this sort of glorification of Bundy as some overly smart, handsome, charming, whatever. And all that was nothing more than a facade. He was a weak, disgusting. He was insecure.
Pathetic.
I mean, yeah, pathetic human being. And he, I mean, he sure made his mark. But like you said, if you think about the victims and what they had happened to them,
Oh yeah.
there's nothing admirable about him or his story or his charisma or his drive or how he was able to pass polygraph tests, representing himself in court, his academic accomplishments, all of that was nothing more than to prop him up himself to where he was the one that was in charge. I mean, the fact that he went through that whole spiel of getting his girlfriend back and then completely just ghosting her because he just wanted to prove that he could will just tell you everything you need to know about the guy.
I mean, well, look, even in the average person, you ever have a person dump you and one did the dumping, even though the person was awful, but it bothers you in your
Say that
core that
again.
you weren't the one who said it first. You know that kind of phenomenon?
Yeah,
I think
actually.
even in normal people that happens. Now imagine if you're somebody with this pathology that just couldn't take it. You know, serial killers are very, very reactive to humiliation and in ways that most of us really can't understand.
Well,
I
you
mean,
heard
you mentioned,
Schaefer say it.
yeah, yeah, you mentioned Tommy Lynn Sells, right? Well, Tommy Lynn Sells one time was passing through a random town, and a woman who was holding hands with a little boy, her son, hit him in the shoulder, like the same way any of us might, just walking down the street, just bump into a person. And she didn't say she was sorry. And in his mind, she was no better than the mother who had abandoned him
Right.
when he was a boy. By the way, the reason his mother abandoned him is that he attempted to have sex with her and his grandmother.
Makes sense.
But anyway, he left that part out, right?
Of course he did.
So he called himself the little boy without a dream, you know, because he was wandering all over the place. Well, anyway, this woman bumps into him. Well, he was so incensed that he followed the woman and the little boy home and confronted them and beat them to death with a baseball bat because she hadn't apologized in this humiliating incident of bumping him. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. You're talking about people whose ego is that fragile. So it's one thing to be a person who's just going through the normal process of humiliation. I mean, we've all had that. You know, the idiot cuts you off, and you can't. Every fiber of your being wants to speed up, roll down the window, and say, "You stupid moron! You drive like an imbecile." You know, that kind of thing. Everyone's got that. You know, I mean, Josh, you do it with other podcasters.
Yes, I do.
You want to speed up and give them the finger. You know what I mean?
I do it too.
That's So Bundy was like that, but like 10 times worse. Now this is a picture which Kevin actually. I used this picture in the New Evil too. I think in color, a picture he took, but this is the one taken by the police. But I have a picture of the same kit, but this is the kill kit, the kit that Bundy carried, and it's on page 151 of the book. It's easy to find on the internet, but I'll tell you that what you're seeing in this, maybe you could find it on Google and bring it up in
Which
color.
one is that?
But I just want just the kit of his murder kit. Just put Bundy's murder kit because I want to talk about what's in it. While you're pulling that up, I'll mention that one of the strangest things about the Bundy case is that he went from being a serial killer to mass murderer, right? Well, you know, or at least attempted mass murderer when he broke into the sorority house. That's very strange, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that was just
The Chi Omega house.
some
That's
similarities
strange.
there in another case.
Well, I know where you're going with that,
I'll
but
stop.
but anyway. So did you find the
Oh
picture of
yeah.
the kit? Let me just see. Okay, look. All right, let's see. Yeah, there you go. So you notice there the crowbar for getting into doors and windows, just as he had tried to get into society by inveigling himself in, and the flashlight because he preferred the darkness. Yes, Laurie, I agree with you. He's the pig. There's ropes that were not used to incapacitate the victim, I'm sure, so much as pose them in ways that reminded him of certain pornography, with the ropes, with certain knots, or to asphyxiate them, you know, strangle them to death. Cuffs were mostly used when he first would have them in his bug, which is a vehicle favored by serial killers, according to the serial killer study Douglas did, because they're small and can kind of fit in anywhere. You know, they're like, you know, the way a mouse is compared to an elephant. It can kind of get in anywhere. You know, gloves, masks, all that kind of stuff, the hosiery that goes on the head. But the most disturbing thing to me is the Glad trash bag. Um, the Glad trash bag that would have been used to pick up the items left by victims to just dump somewhere, but also for remains, that he wanted to cart away. And Lord knows how many things were in those bags resting on the seats of that VW Bug that he drove away somewhere. I always wanted to know what the awl was used for. I never heard of him using that to stab anyone or anything. I think it was probably used for prying, into, picking at locks and things. But it is very disturbing to think about the possibility that the awl was used to threaten or stab. But that isn't really what we know him to have used. It's also interesting that there's no item here that would have been used for the dismemberment of victims where he decided to choose, to keep the head of the victim. I have no idea what he would have used for that. With Kimberly Leach, he went, I think, the day of the killing and he purchased a very large blade, sort of like a Bowie knife kind of thing, at a sporting goods store. Lord knows what he was using, but I imagine it was some kind of hunting blade or something like that, in addition to all of this. But this is all discovered by a cop who pulled him over for, like, the way he was driving. So because of his lousy driving, this guy that gets pulled over goes from schmuck in the police office, getting, in the police um, down depot, whatever, getting questioned, to being a serial killer. You
Yeah.
could just imagine. So what do you want to do, Josh? Do you want to, like, take some calls? Do you want
Do you want to
to
do
ask
that?
people?
We're at 2 hours. We're at 2 hours right now. I don't know.
I'm okay. I can go a little longer. I'm winded, I can,
Sure,
but I
no.
love when we do the calls. And the reason I think we should do it, is that I really think this is very activating for a lot of people. And some people might want to talk. Now I
Sure.
can't give clinical advice. This can't, I can't be like Dr. Phil here. I'm not here to help you out today, but I can, but I can, but I can give general thoughts or talk a little bit about Bundy or answer questions people might have about the psychology of this kind of offender. Zoe Trope, yes,
Well,
yes, yes.
and Ruby wants to know here. I might have missed it, but what is your opinion of killing a child versus a woman?
Opinion of? Well, to be honest with you, I don't think he knew how old Leach was. I mean, he picked her up outside of school. He had a general idea, but I think, the idea was he was intoxicated a little bit, and in his mind, a female was a female. It's like when it's like a thing where he was so impulsive and so hungry, he stopped caring about finding somebody that really fit the part in his prototype and just snatched whatever vulnerable female he could find. And with Kimberly Leach, I believe the idea is that he lied to her. He told her that her father had gotten hurt, and that's how he got her to go into the vehicle. He said, "Oh, your dad has, been injured, and I want to take you to him." And so he preyed on her love of her father. But it was, and then you have to picture him just like they said, jogging around the van, like whoop, 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 did it. She's in the car now, and if he did what he did consistent with prior murders, he would have incapacitated her in some way, probably hit her on the head or punched her in the face. In the Hoyerman case, the Rex Hoyerman case, somebody who, if he's guilty, it is thought had very intensely studied other murderers. The bail doc, the bail document that contains, like, his writings on preparations for crimes, talks about him having learned that, about how to, like, blitz style attack the person. He would have done it by putting his hands around your throat very quickly, or punching you in the face, or knocking you out somehow. And this is a characteristic that Burgess and Douglas and Ressler and so forth found in a lot of serial killers, and they called organized offending. Organized serial killers do that. They attack you, they bop you, and they isolate you somewhere to play out their fantasy. Whereas a more disorganized offender just kind of does it right out in the open. And they pick more random victims. And I think the reason that's relevant is that the exhaustion, the being on the run from jail, the alcohol, so forth, made Bundy look just a little bit more disorganized at this point. So he's sort of disheveled. He's seen by a lot of witnesses. You know what I mean? He doesn't clean
Mhm.
the car very well, which leads to his getting in trouble. I think you also see the disorganization a little more in the sorority house, where he's just on a frenzy. He like bites one woman and leaves teeth marks that lead to his condemnation. He's picking up whatever ambient weapons are there instead of using a kit, right? So what you're seeing is the descent into a more disorganized offender. We think of the whole organized, disorganized, mixed thing in terms of a given killing, but you could also look at a pattern. Like they were organized until they got here, right? Or you could have a killing where the person starts out drunk here, and then they wake up from the alcohol and they go, boy, I better clean this up. And then it gets super organized, right? So you don't want to just think of it like, the given. I think the reason that he picked her had a lot to do with the increased disorganization of that moment for him.
And yeah, this question right here, and I don't know if you can answer it or not. It is an ongoing case, but I'd like to know if Dr. Brucato thinks Koberger was trying to mimic Bundy. If Koberger
If
is
Koberger,
guilty.
I have a lot to say about that I'm going to be very careful about. I've already kind of hinted at that. I suspect that if Koberger is guilty, you have to remember that Koberger was a student of the criminal mind. I mean, he studied under my friend Dr. Ramsland. He was at DeSales. He, would have been doing a lot of reading about killers and probably even in his private life. There was a true crime book in the search of his home that was kind of marked up that everyone, I think, is waiting with bated breath to find out. Everyone is waiting to find out what book that was, right? And I think anyone's guess is as good as another person's about who he was studying. But there are just some interesting parallels in the life of Bundy that make one wonder about if that person was in his mind. For example, moving out to Washington, studying criminology, being somebody who might have posed as a helper figure, the going over state lines, the association with um, the park, where he claimed that he was stargazing, is interesting because it's a place that has a tie to someone who was suspected to be a Bundy victim early in his story. There was a home invasion that looked an awful lot like breaking into the sorority house and kind of going in a frenzy. But I think we have to be careful with it because it gets into a little bit of speculation. I'm just saying, don't be surprised if we find out that Bundy was somebody that he might have studied. And I have also said that if Koberger is guilty, I think the only reason that he would not have gone on to be a serial killer is simply that he got caught. But a lot of the characteristics there, they're not typical of a mass murder. Remember, I'm an authority on mass murder. And I can tell you that mass murders don't tend to be motivated like it looks like this was. The Koberger case appears to be motivated a lot more like serial killings are.
Mm.
And that worries me, about the possibility of if he is guilty, if he gets released. Because remember, juries are not really going to be told about motive that much because the logic is motive doesn't matter. You did it or you didn't, right?
Sure.
I think the motive does matter because if you're motivated like a serial killer and you have a score high up on the scale in the new evil, chances are you'll keep doing it to perfect the fantasy or whatever. So, but let's kind of wait to see what happens. I think we're going to discover that if he is guilty, he studied a number of offenders. You remember early on when the case happened, there were people running all over the place talking about that he might have been inspired by Raider, because Raider committed a home invasion and and things got out of control and so forth. Personally, I believe not to get on the Koberger trail, but I think that chances are Koberger had one particular victim in mind and underestimated what it was going to be like to go into that place, and that there were people there who were awake and so forth. My particular hypothesis that I have talked about elsewhere is that there may have been some mechanism of surveillance to know what was going on in there. And it might have been something he used his phone to do. And then on the night of the killing, he would have had to have like put the phone in airplane mode or shut it off, and then would not have known that there were new developments. That, you know, Ethan and Zaina are suddenly there and they're eating and talking and up, you know, and that, and the Kaylee is up and there and the whole. In other words, he might have had the idea to go in and kill one person, shut off whatever he was using to know what was going on in there, and then gotten there and been completely shocked, and then had to eliminate a whole slew of people. But my suspicion has always been something like that went on. Of course, can't prove it, but putting all the facts together in the kind of Sherlockian way I like to, that would account for some details. And but I can't say it for sure. I'm waiting with bated breath to find out.
So there's a link pinned at the top. You click on that link, and it will be voice only. Even if you wanted to show your face, you can't. And it's basically the same exact thing as a phone call. So if you want to tap in and ask the good doctor or Josh a question, please feel free. We'll take a few, and then we'll wrap it up. And if nobody wants to, we'll bail out.
I'm sure somebody's going to. We always get somebody on the line, Jeff.
Oh yeah, I think so too. Let's see.
And they won't sound like a spirit box today, which is great.
Well, they
When
might.
we used to do it by phone, we'd get those weird, sometimes. But what is this person asking me? Caroline wants to know how old I am.
12.
Well, my birthday's coming up, so but I don't need to tell anybody that. That's my birthday's in March.
You're not going to
Yours is
tell
in
people how-
November, Josh.
Yeah.
Yours is in.
Yeah. They
Yeah,
you're
my
not
birthday.
going to tell people how old you are?
Who cares? Doesn't matter.
Well, somebody
I
does.
don't. I mean, I suppose somebody cares, but it's all right. As Caroline says, her birthday's March 14th. Not bad, not bad. That's not so long after mine. So, but anyway.
Yeah, we
So,
got
but oh, Shannon is the 20th. Okay, cool.
Go ahead. You're on with this. Cassie, go ahead. Cassie, you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh,
I can.
there we go. So we were on with Calvin Coolidge. Okay. Hello, Cassie.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi. I'm doing pretty good. I just called in because I wanted to say two things. First off, thank you, Dr. Brucato and Josh, for bringing awareness to victims and helping us be armed with more knowledge and intelligence about the stuff that goes on around us. And that's very, I see that that's very important. And I think it's wonderful.
Very
that you
important.
do that.
That's beautiful that you point that out. Thank you. It means a lot to me.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to say was just that I've heard Gary Brucato in many different places talk about people who are on the autistic spectrum, and I'm one of those people.
Oh, probably one of my all-time most beloved groups of people to work with.
I just wanted to thank you for helping to dispel the idea that maybe autistic people are more prone to violence, because some people think that. And I just really appreciate what you do to make sure that you are very fair to mention any kind of mental health issues or developmental disorders, and I just want to say thank you for that too.
Oh, well, that means a lot to me. It's interesting because there is, if you don't mind my asking, how do you identify? And because I don't want to assume anything about your gender.
Oh,
Yeah.
she, her. I'm a
Oh,
girl.
okay. Well, the reason I ask is because I just saw a very interesting new article about the underdiagnosis of autism in females. And
Yes.
what studies are telling us is they get diagnosed much later, and they are often mistaken for having things like depression, OCD, personality disorders, things like that. Whereas with boys, there's a tendency to diagnose them even when they're children.
Right.
And I can tell you from patients I've had that people who discovered later in life that they're on the spectrum, it's like completely transformative because to discover that you're neurodivergent, and that explains why, for example, it always bothered you to go to parties, and be
Right.
overwhelmed by the sound, or understanding for the first time why, it makes you extremely uncomfortable to have to wear a different type of shoe
Oh my
that you've
gosh.
worn for a
Yeah.
very long time, right? Or
Yes.
things
Yes.
like that. These are things, or why it is that you have this incredible ability to memorize things that other people consider insignificant. These are things that are really quite validating for a person. And I have to tell you, I think there is a tendency to romanticize certain conditions like autism, like everybody is Rain Man, who
Oh
has
yeah.
it.
Sure. Yeah.
That's another thing that it kind of gets on my nerves is the minimization of the suffering and the difficult aspects
Right.
of it. But I think that it is, but to work with individuals who view the world through that completely different lens is a very great gift. And so I think it's beautiful for you to call in and express appreciation like that.
Yeah.
And look, there are some offenders that have autism, but
Right.
that's because you're going to see offenders everywhere across
Right.
every
Exactly.
condition, right?
Yes.
But it's very rare. When it is present, in addition to whatever the heck it is that makes a person violent, there can be certain qualities to the crime. For example, there is a case of a guy named Brian Coey. I just talked about him on Court TV a few weeks ago. He identifies as on the spectrum. He was diagnosed that way. Well, he had a fascination with bodies to the
Right.
point
Yeah.
that there was some question of him becoming a surgeon. But
Mm-hmm.
then, under the pressure of what was going on in his life and so forth, that he was angry and whatever, he decided to experimentally kill a homeless man and butcher him. Now, autism didn't make him do that,
No.
but the autism made him somebody that had a kind of a detachment, a scientific um, detachment where he was interested
Right.
originally in a pro-social way about bodies, but then the aggressiveness mixed with that made for a very particularly horrifying offense.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
point is that the autism was not the cause, and that is just sort of like saying that somebody killed, because they had a certain body size or they had long
Right.
hair or something. I mean, this is something that's just because it's sort of mixed in there doesn't mean it was a cause. I think it figured into the detached quality that he had, the scientific quality that he had, but that's about it. And but I think it's such a great point. And you sound like a very interesting person. Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Central Arkansas. I originally was
Oh,
born in Delaware, though.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Delaware is a very interesting state, as is Arkansas. And all right, well, do you have any particular case that you're interested in where there's a kind of a goofy um, overemphasis on the autism of the offender, or is there a particular one that bothers you?
No, there isn't one actually that bothers me. It's just something that I've noticed in general is brought up sometimes.
Okay.
And I've just noticed that you are very careful to make sure that you don't
Very
stigmatize,
cool.
and I really appreciate that.
Oh, that's because I know people that are on the spectrum, and I know
Right.
I think of them when I think about people lumping people into categories.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, as a general rule, one of the hallmarks of a kind of mediocre brain, I think, is the tendency to attribute a negative characteristic to an entire group of people. I think that the tendency, it's so foolish scientifically and as a human being that I just dismiss it immediately when somebody does it,
Yes.
because it tells you something about like the way their brain operates. Like you can't win an argument with somebody like that.
Right.
It's like the Archie Bunker brain. You just kind of go like, yeah, okay, all right, yeah. It's one thing to be a categorizer, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm a
Yeah.
categorizer. I think it's good to categorize, but it's another thing to kind of assume something bad of a person simply because they have a certain skin color or a certain
Right.
sexuality or a certain gender or a certain body type or a certain look or a certain. I mean, this is stupid. I don't know how else to
Yeah. I think
Oh,
I think Eric has a good point too about people
Eric
who have
Schultz and
autism being more vulnerable sometimes to a lot of things. I would imagine there's probably a lot more people with autism who are victims than perpetrators, for example.
absolutely. That's certainly true of schizophrenia, for
Yeah.
example. I mean,
Yes.
when you see this in the whole gun debate, this proclivity to say, well, I mean, if it weren't for all the psychotic people, there wouldn't be mass shooting. Except when I did the study with Dr. Gerges at Columbia, the largest study ever done of mass murder, we found that mass shootings are committed by people with serious mental illness, and that is to say, psychosis, about 12% of the time.
Right. Yeah.
So, what about the other 88%?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's an exaggeration that is used, stigmatization. But they are far more likely to be the victims of crime, and
Yes.
that, of course, makes me think about Sebastian Rogers,
Mhm.
who that poor child that we don't know where he is, what became of him.
It's coming up on the
his-
year anniversary too.
yeah, his dad often comes into the chat,
Yeah, he called me
and
Joshy Poo earlier or something like that.
oh, is he still in the chat, Josh?
I don't know if he is or
Yeah,
not. He
yeah.
was.
Really good, a
That's
really
why
nice guy, and God
I
knows what he's feeling, with his son gone, and
I'm with it.
and what he thinks happened and so forth. But the idea of the victimization of this kid, who was autistic is unbearable,
Unbearable.
right? So,
Yeah.
but learn. I think your call is an excellent lesson in appreciating individual differences, just as we're being reminded by AJ. Because I mean, think about Bundy. What was the straw? What was the fire that went to the straw that caused what we call the precipitating factor? I'm not calling you Joshua Brookins.
No, that's
Uh,
what Seth called me.
I cannot call you that. It makes
Why
you sound
not?
like, because it makes you sound like, I don't know, a weak pirate.
If
Joshua
you're gonna
Brookins. Yeah, I can't deal with that.
Pirate.
But anyway, but the thing is, think about it. What pushed Bundy over the edge? Rejection.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody
Puts me over
remind
the edge by calling
making
me a
him
weak
feel.
pirate.
Joshua Pook, is that going to push you over the edge, Josh? Making a person think that they couldn't keep up with the Joneses, and as a consequence deserved nothing.
Right.
And that I just think, as a general rule, seeing goodness where other people see weirdness is always going to bring out the best in people.
I agree.
I'm very big on people who say, I know this person's in jail. That doesn't mean that they're not a human being. I know that
Right.
this person, has a mental illness. That doesn't mean they're not a human being. I know this person is homeless. I know this person is maybe physically, not particularly attractive to people. This person may be extremely beautiful. So the world can only relate to them through their gorgeousness. I mean, there
Mhm.
are things, that can make a person just very different. A person could be profoundly intelligent. But I am very drawn to people that are kind of lonely or like on the outskirts. I think they're the most interesting people, absolutely most interesting people. And people that are on the spectrum, when they use their gifts, can change the world. Can absolutely change the world.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, I don't understand ostracizing them. So, but anyway, thank you so much for your call. I'm sorry I kept you.
No, it's fine. Thank you so much for just being available. I really appreciate it. And thank you too, Josh. I don't want to miss you.
It's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. I
That's
appreciate
beautiful. Pookie the Pirate. Do we have another call? Pookie the Pirate. I think Pookie the Pirate is a great name for you now that I'm thinking about it.
Nah, it's not a great name for me. Let me see.
My goal was to get you to give up on the Pookie thing, and it worked. Now let's move on.
I don't give up on Pookie, just the pirate part. I don't want to be a pirate.
I am not calling you Pookie.
I don't want to be a pirate. Yeah.
All right, fine. Pookie the pervert. Yeah.
That might not be the first time somebody's called me that either, which is
I bet you're not the first person that's been called Pookie the pervert.
probably not. Yeah, one of these things have lasting effects too, which is crazy. Like McDonough started the corn dog stuff, and it's stood the test of time. Like if that meteor hits in 2032, and then life goes on. If life goes on, people will still bring up corn dogs. So
I know it'll be like the cockroaches and some Tupperware and like somebody who survived the fallout going like
Pookie the pirate, the corn dog eater. All right, there's nobody. This show's we're done here. I don't think
there's nobody else.
Nah, we had two people drop off. Once they heard
you want to give them one more minute?
Pookie the pervert, they bounced.
All right. Well, listen, Josh. The one thing we should do is we should ask people if there is a killer they want us to cover next time. So far, who have we done? Whom have we done? We've done Jeffrey Dahmer,
Richard Ramirez,
Bundy, Richard Ramirez, and there was another one, wasn't there? He's sworn there was another one we did. Or was Ramirez the first? I think it was. It was Ramirez because I did the show on him. The Night Stalker tapes. When I did the show, we did it. So I think we got Ramirez. Dahmer was the second one, right? Who was the one we covered when we talked about predators generally? There was no particular offender?
Nope. We just talked about.
So this is the third one. This is the third one. Yeah, right. Oh, I love that one. Yeah. Kelsey, to answer your question, I agree. I think we should do a female offender. I had wanted to do Eileen Wuornos, but she's very different, than a lot of the offenders we've discussed. But or we could do an episode just on women who kill, which is a whole other topic. But Josh, you want to throw a couple of names out there? Like, for example, Zodiac, I know is one we've heard people are interested in.
I like the Zodiac, and then I wouldn't mind covering Tommy Lynn Sells either.
Well, if we do Tommy Lynn Sells, we should get on as a guest my friend Diane Fanning, who was his biographer, who of course got him to confess to a crime and everything. Diane Fanning wrote the book on Tommy Lynn Sells, Through the Bedroom Window, I think it's called. Lizzie Borden, I could talk about. Borden. Borden is a case that I know everything about. I just wrote up with Ann Burgess for a book. So let's sort of hold that until the book comes out so we don't steal our own thunder. Ed Gein, which is the correct way to pronounce it. People say Gein, but it's Ed Gein, is an interesting case. Milat is interesting. I'm reading the Gacy. We could certainly do Gacy. I thought she wrote Gary, freaks me out. I said, oh, that's sad, but it's Gacy she wrote. Green River Killer. Ridgway is interesting. There is someone that I know who would be very interested if we were to cover Ridgway. Pee Wee Gaskin's a good one. We've already talked about Hormone ad nauseum. Richard Speck. Okay, so they're all over the map. Jodi Arias, people keep talking about Arias. We could talk about. But Son of Sam, I think, is a good idea. That is a good
Yeah,
one.
the Atlanta murders. That's a good one too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Son of Sam jumps out at me, and Gary Ridgway jumps out at me. Jack Spillman, too disgusting. The case is too gross. For that, I would commend you to Andrew Dodge, who I think interviewed him. I think his show is called like Unforbidden True Crime or something. I would commend you there. I think he did an episode on that. Susan Smith, we did a whole episode on her in the interview room. Yeah, I would say, Josh, if you want to do like a poll, I would say ask people between Warnos, Son of Sam, and Ridgway
You want to
who
do that
they'd like
poll
to
right
see back.
now?
Well, if you could just get an idea, because I would like to prepare if we're going to do a next episode. I mean, I usually do. Russ Williams is a great idea too. Dayton Leroy Rogers, of course, I know. Would you believe I have a signed photo of him sent from jail?
I would believe that. Yes.
Oh yes, and Alcala is a great idea. I think Alcala is just fascinating case. I have some of the photos of unidentified victims that just break my heart.
Let's see.
Yeah, those are good ideas. Israel Key's a good idea too. But yeah, I would say the poll would be Ridgway, Son of Sam, Zodiac, and Alcala and Warnos. Those 5.
Okay.
So what do? You flash it on the screen and they pick one?
It's not. I don't know. These
Okay.
polls suck.
Polls help. They don't predict elections apparently, but other than that, they're good.
Okay. All right, tell me the names again. Go ahead.
Oh Lord,
Are we doing Zodiac?
I feel like a memory test. Zodiac.
Yep.
Son of Sam. Eileen Warnos.
I don't know how to spell that.
Wuornos.
Okay, next.
Oh yeah, Kemper. Somebody brought up Kemper. That's a good one too.
He's a good
But
one.
okay, so you got those 3 so far.
Zodiac's on the
said
Warnos.
Alcala. Alcala was that's the dating game killer.
I also don't know how to spell that one.
Alcala.
Oh, Alcala, like alpaca.
Yeah, Alcala, and then
I think it only lets me do
4. And I think, okay, so then leave it at that. Yeah. Although Kemper is a great idea too.
Do we cover?
And then we'll stick to it, whatever the audience decides. It's like a choose your own adventure,
I already know who's going to win.
Who?
Here we go. I'll tell you if it pans out. All right, there it is. Poll. Which killer do we cover next?
What did you do? You flashed on all their screens?
Yeah. Well, it's just a poll in the chat now. So if you look like on YouTube,
I don't see it on the poll, but I mean,
well, you won't see it in StreamYard. You have to go to YouTube.
Okay, cool.
Right
Look
now,
at all these memberships people gifted. That's awesome.
Warnos is winning right now. We'll give it a couple minutes too.
Warnos is winning.
It's between her and the Zodiac so far.
I had a horse race.
Yeah, I would say so. You remember when you were talking earlier about it was written from the view of
bugs?
Yeah. I wrote a short story one time that has never seen the light of day and never will. But I wrote
we a couple of interesting characters, aren't we? Yeah.
I wrote a story about the 3 wise men from the from the view of the camels.
Wow. I love it.
It was awful.
If I wrote that story from the point of view of my life, there would be too much of a struggle finding 3 wise men.
It was the way. I remember like reading through it and going, "Oh my god!" I mean, it was funny, but it was ridiculous.
What did the camels say?
They spat at each other a lot.
You were a very interesting child, Josh.
Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Let me understand this. The camels that the kings rode on, that the Magi rode on,
Yeah.
or the Blessed Virgin and Saint Joseph.
No, the ones that the wise men rode on.
So the wise men ride in, and while the wise men are in there venerating the
Yeah,
Christ
then
child,
these camels are having
they're chatting
discussions.
away.
Yeah, they're talking to each other in camel talk.
They're speaking dromedary, I guess would be the fancy way of saying camel
So,
talk.
yeah.
They're speaking dromedary. Okay. All right. And the only thing they have to do that they say to each other is the spewing of spit.
No, I mean it's a whole thing. Like, one stole the other's girlfriend, and it's just an on and on thing. It's only
But
like
how does it, like,
5
why
minutes.
couldn't it hold on. I'm sorry, this is the shrink in me. I gotta understand something. Why couldn't you just write a story about two talking camels? Why did they have to be the camels
Because it was Christmas
at the
time.
birth of Christ? What did Jesus have to do with the camels?
Nothing.
So, why couldn't they just be in the zoo? Like, why were they at the birth of
Because they
Jesus?
had to go across this like long journey, and they're like, "Oh my God, we're following a star. Like, these guys are crazy,"
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
in
they're
other
like,
words, they represent the part of us that is so bestial and animal and kind of dumb that it doesn't understand the spiritual significance of the schlep to
yeah,
get to the
yeah.
manger scene.
And then they show up, and they're like, oh, they're like, oh, look, they bring all these gifts to these, and all we get to drink is like water and eat hay and crap. And they're like, I want some myrrh, I want some frankincense.
Very interesting. So in a way, then the story goes from making absolutely no sense to actually being extremely profound, right? Son of
No,
Sam, that was,
not
yeah.
at all.
But that, because the profound significance of the story is that the story of Jesus's birth from a very human perspective, if you didn't understand the spiritual significance, would
Mhm.
look like a big stupid slog being born in a filthy manger, dirty animals that stink, shepherds were the lowest of the low at that time in the social spheres, and then living in complete obscurity until he's a teenager, 12 years old, and
Yeah.
then ultimately being hated, spat on, crucified, buried, the whole thing. Before he rises, the idea would be that just looks like a big stupid walk towards nothingness. And if you
Well,
viewed it through
that's
a very
yeah.
human lens, you'd be like those camels.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you're churching it up a little bit. We didn't really get
Well,
I didn't get that
that's
far.
what we do.
We didn't get that
Well,
far,
maybe
but
yeah. But isn't it true?
well, yeah, the end payoff was like how they were the vessels that delivered the wise men to, the King of Kings, basically.
Well, that's the
And
best
at
part of
the
the
end, it was
story,
like,
is that in the
hallelujah,
end, yeah,
hallelujah. Yes,
right. But the best part of the story is that they thought they were just doing a stupid slog. But at the
correct,
end of the day, it turned out that if it
correct.
weren't for them,
And they were
right,
with their little
right,
melodrama, like, that was my girlfriend, or, that was, I won that race as a kid. Two of them were brothers, and they were having their spat, and then the other one was just a family friend. So
right. But the point is, they were integral to make the scene possible. They
correct,
thought
yeah,
they would just
yeah,
beast of burden, right? So
yeah,
it's an interesting story,
sort of.
and
I mean,
I appreciate that. I think when you wrote it as a kid, you didn't think
I
deeply
didn't
about
write it
it.
as a kid. I wrote it when I was 35.
Oh, I think when you were 35, you didn't think about it on that very deep level. Oh
Yeah.
my God, that's so funny. That reminds me of the scene in The Golden Girls where Rose, who's an imbecile, is talking about her happiest Christmas when she and every single one of her siblings still believed in Santa Claus. You know, she's like 65 years old.
Right.
And she's like, "Oh, the best Christmas we ever had back in St. Olaf was when every one of my brothers and sisters, right down to the youngest, and they all the way up to the oldest, all still believe." And she's like, "That's got to be 10 years ago now." And they're like, "What?" Anyway,
It was
all right.
called.
So,
It was
so what's
called
the result of the poll?
It was called the Three Wise Camels.
3 wise humps.
Warnos with 40% of the vote.
Are you serious? What about in the swing states?
Kala was 15, Zodiac was 32, and Son of Sam pulling up the rear with 12.
Wait, who was second in the race?
Alcala?
Alcala. Okay, well then I think those will be our next 2 episodes.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's really fair. So then, but Warnos is going to be very difficult to breathe new life into. She's sort of overcovered, but as people can see, I have something to say that's a little different about every one of these cases.
It's going to be it'll be an interesting show.
It'll
Dr.
be
Gary, I
interesting.
appreciate it. We are at 2 hours, 45 minutes.
Oh
And
boy, that's pretty good given that we said we'd do an hour.
I think when we started, we're like, we're going to do an hour and a half. And as soon as we said that, by the way, I knew that was not happening. The two of us, we're talking about friggin' camels.
We didn't bring up the humps.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Well, actually, I did. Okay, so
Ridgway is somebody that we are definitely going to cover. I think.
We'd have to cover Ridge.
So how about we just Zodiac eventually we'll get there too. So I think we'll do Warnos. No, it's Warnos and Zodiac. Or sorry, Zodiac was number 2.
I thought you said number 2 was
I
Alcala.
was wrong. Sometimes
what
I'm
are you
wrong.
saying? That okay, all right.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy. I wish that's what would happen in politics, They announce the winner and then they come out, they're like, oops, Josh was reading the votes, and we're completely wrong.
Remember when Steve Harvey read off the wrong, was it Miss America?
Oh yeah. What about it?
You remember when he did that?
When who did Miss America?
Steve Harvey.
Oh yeah. Yes, of course.
It was on the card.
You like Steve Harvey?
No.
You're a Steve Harvey fan?
No.
Oh,
I mean, kind of actually. I like Family Feud.
Well,
but
some people like Family Feud because some people like Family Feud because they've lived it.
Well, look, I think
I've lived Family Feud. You know what I mean? Like the family might as well have lined up like that.
He's a great stand-up comedian, and I do like him on Family Feud. So yeah, I guess
when his face when he looks miserable because like someone says something really stupid.
Yeah,
like he'll be like, name an article of clothing you wear on your head. And the person will be like, a glove.
Yeah,
and then he looks at them like, and he makes
and his mustache curls up.
Yeah, it's like, or his eyes get too big. Yeah, no, that's funny. I agree. That is funny.
I'm a judge for Miss America.
All right. Oh, you're a judge for Miss America. That looks like an interesting job. I mean, can you imagine? There's something about pageantry that has a depressing quality to it, but that's another story. It makes me think of John Benet Ramsey.
Yeah, me too, actually.
But that's an interesting job.
Seriously.
But,
all right, Dr. Gary.
All right. Well, anyway, are we done?
Yep, we're done.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Always fun.
All right. Thank you to everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you, guys.
everyone.
There it is. There it was. There will always be. You just never know where we're going to go here and laugh and not leave you feeling horrified and depressed, because it's serious stuff that's happening here. So try to lighten the mood a little bit. Dr. Gary is the absolute best. Good friend. I consider him a very good friend in
We speak all the time. I appreciate it a lot. I know that you guys. What's your question? Oh, from Dr. Gary, I can't answer. I think he truly was horrified that night. He's trying to help me out with the. Anyway. Unbelievable. Let me see. Hold on here. Alan Jackson's Jar of Nickels. I like that. That's funny. Thanks, Josh and Dr. G. Appreciate your time. Grateful. We appreciate you guys playing with us. And we will catch you guys on the next one. Take care. Thank you for the gifted memberships and the super chats and people just showing up, hitting that like button and subscribe. That helps the channel more than you'll ever know.